If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this.
Ghost hunters, paranormal investigators, and people who venture into haunted locations, what is the most chilling and frightening paranormal encounter you've had out there?
A warning for budding paranormal hunters. Since I was young, I had always been fascinated with the paranormal world. I grew up in a haunted house, and when I would ask about the other residents in the house, my parents would just explain they were passing through or had their own agendas and should be left to their tasks. This helped me grow up not really fearing spirit activity but just fueled my curiosity. By the time I had reached 16, I had spent countless hours watching paranormal shows like Ghost Hunters and basically anything else that aimed to prove and question the existence of spirit entities. As a teen, a few friends and I decided to sneak out at night to investigate some grave sites. Armed with cameras and recorders, we intruded on graveyards both new and historic and tried to communicate with those passed on. We got some really interesting shots, lots of orbs, some bright flashing anomalies, and mist. The one that stood out the most was the last photo we took of our car before we left the last graveyard. It appeared to have several figures standing around the car with clearly defined heads, torsos, and legs. Freaked out, we got in the car and went home, not giving a thought to what we may have brought home. Since then I have had an entity following and oppressing me. It's been over 12 years since our escapade. In times of extreme stress it will manipulate electric devices. It won't allow me to use light switches, I'll either receive a shock or the switch won't work. I've lived in many places since then, so faulty wiring is ruled out. On one occasion I put on some Elton John with my stereo because that's my music of choice when depressed, and it fried the stereo. When I'm in a bad depressive low, it will lurk around our house. It will crouch in corners, sit on the bed, and peer through doorways. My fiancée can see it occasionally as well. The worst behavior is that it likes to mimic. It will occasionally have a scent or a voice of someone tied to a base memory. Almost always someone who has passed. It's bad enough and painful enough that when my best friend passed away this summer, the only time I visited her grave was the day she was buried. I have stayed away just to save myself more heartbreak. Living with this thing that follows means I have to take a monthly ritual cleansing bath. I smudge my house, as advised by an indigenous elder, and I wear an evil eye bracelet as well as a black tourmaline pendant just to try to keep it from taking advantage of me. I sprinkle myself with salt before and after visiting any religious establishment or memorial site just to avoid it tagging along. It always comes back, and when it's back, I feel like I don't have a voice, I'm irritable and impatient, and I lose passion for all the good things in life. I have had religious leaders pray over me and try to get its name, elders try and bless me, and various healers give me potions and prayers, and nothing has been able to rid me of it. It just comes back. Please don't go seeking trouble because it will find you. It will find you and do its best to hold you until your dying breath. I don't know what this will mean for me when all things come to an end, but I hope my story can help convince others to avoid meddling with things that are better left to their own business. That being said, let's dive into the creepy and spooky stories other people have shared of their experiences and encounters with ghosts and the paranormal. Something happened to me years back. I was friends with someone who does paranormal investigations for a living, and he brought me and a few other friends along on a few investigations to teach us how to do it. One was held in a nearby village, which was not at all known for anything paranormal, so I was not really expecting anything out of that trip. Well, it turns out that the place we were going to was quite haunted. We went down to the basement, and I felt unwelcome in there. I stayed because I was trying to appear professional to the owner of the house, and then I felt something tighten around my neck, as if someone was trying to choke me. I was not wearing anything around my neck. The force became so constricting that I couldn't breathe or speak. So I ran out. Everyone was spooked. Before the team went home, a friend who had the most developed psychic abilities in the group told me to do a banishing ritual upon arriving home because, according to her, my energy was a magnet for discarnate entities, at least at that time. I did a half-assed energy clearing when I got home because I was so tired and sleepy. When I got out of bed in the morning, something invisible pulled my hair. That was when I panicked and did the full banishing ritual. Something followed us home after ghost hunting. We need help getting rid of it. Recently, my sister, our new friend, and I have been involved in ghost hunting, and we've gone a couple of times. Last night we were talking through a spirit box, and it said, "I will follow you." We adamantly said no, you are not allowed to follow us. Despite this, we've had unexplained activity in my sister's room ever since. Items are being thrown on the floor, and her shelf was violently shaking this afternoon. We lit incense to neutralize the energy, used evil eyes to repel negativity, and told the entity to leave, as it was not welcome. However, the activity continued. I think something did attach to one of us, but I'm not sure how to get rid of it. Can we go back to the location we talked to it and drop it back off in a sense? We would greatly appreciate any insight. Thank you. Back when I was a teen, my friends and I went to Guttleberg Cemetery in Wales. While the cemetery itself is creepy, especially at night, we didn't experience anything unusual. As we were leaving, another group of people showed up and gave us a quick backstory about the place. I don't remember the details, but I remember them telling us it wasn't an aborted child cemetery. I believe those were the rumors about what the actual cemetery is. Right before we left, one of the people mentioned that a guy did, in fact, die near there while on a ghost hunting trip. They told us that you're supposed to park far away and walk to the cemetery since it's a private lot. This is what that guy did, and while walking to the cemetery, he was struck by a car and ended on the road. While driving the way home, my buddy driving slammed on his brakes because a guy was in the middle of the road. Then he walked into the woods and straight up disappeared. I always thought that was strange. Probably nothing but a very weird coincidence. I've heard interesting stories from friends about Guttleberg, stories that were corroborated between two totally different groups of people. But I'll stick to a story I experienced firsthand. I and 3 close friends went to the alternative entrance to Hunters Creek in Wales, on Hunters Creek Road, a little over 10 years ago. This was about 8:30 or 9 p.m., I think. We drove in my friend's Jeep and went a little bit into the driveway of the parking area, which is surrounded by trees. We got out and hung around. We intended to smoke some weed. I heard the sound of something living in the woods, and it was absolutely blood-curdling. It was the lowest, darkest, most aggressive sound I'd ever heard. I'd heard audio of bears, and this was a lower register than that. Whatever this was, it sounded like pure evil, or at the very least, it sounded like it would and could kill us without a second thought. There were 4 of us. Only 2 of us heard this sound. The instant we heard it, we were completely urgent and adamant with the other 2, one of whom was the driver, to get back in the Jeep and get the ever-living hell out of there immediately. They were confused, but our urgency took hold of everything, and we got in the Jeep, backed out, and drove away. The only other person who heard this thing is the only person who actually saw it. I never saw it. He was in one of the back seats as we were driving away, freaking out, saying, "No, no, no." As we were explaining what we just experienced, he said he witnessed the creature. He said it was a dog with a man's face. In the wake of this encounter, we found out that demon dogs have an obscure place in the folklore of the area, and there were some second-hand stories of a related nature among some folks we knew, though none were actually shared with me. The person who claims to have seen this creature stands by his story to this day. I did a lot of ghost hunting and had some interesting/spooky experiences, but they didn't really scare me. I had 2 really scary experiences. One was many years ago when I was living in an old Victorian in the Bay Area that was reported to be haunted. I was talking to my boyfriend, or rather listening to him talk. We were facing each other just a couple of feet apart. We were talking about how the house was supposedly haunted, and all of a sudden I heard a loud voice in my left ear say, "Boo." The scary part was my boyfriend continued talking normally. He clearly did not hear it. The second was really just eerie, and the feeling I got was super scary and hard to explain if you haven't felt it. We had been ghost hunting all evening, and the 3 of us in my group were staying in a hotel room together. 2 of my friends were in the bed, I was on the couch right at the foot of the bed. We went to sleep, and one girl fell asleep right away. I thought my other friend was asleep. I was lying there just getting more and more scared. I chalked it up to a spooky evening and just tried to ignore the feeling and go to sleep. I felt like, and I know this is super weird, there was a very large person standing by the front door staring at me. It felt almost like a non-human, or an animal, like a Bigfoot or something. I'm just lying there trying to ignore it and fall asleep, and my friend says, "Are you awake? There's something huge and black standing by the door," and I'm so freaked out. I'm an urban explorer/photographer. I don't actively go ghost hunting, but sometimes it just happens. I was exploring an abandoned military hospital in Maryland this past September and stumbled upon an entrance that is extremely well hidden. All other entrances are double or triple boarded up, but this one was mysteriously untouched. I really wanted to explore inside, so I ignored the red flag and entered. Before it was a military hospital, this place was also a private women's college. It had closed down during the Great Depression because only elitists could afford to send their daughters there. It seemed as if an old classroom had been turned into a storage space for medical supplies. There were lockers filled to the brim with old, rusty medical tools, and bloodstains soaked into the concrete floor. There was a hallway that led to 4 other rooms. I decided to check out one that had a hospital bed inside. It was in nearly perfect condition, aside from dust and dirt that had collected there over the decades. When I was taking pictures, I heard a loud bang come from the room right next door to the room I was in. It wasn't a windy day, and no windows were open. I immediately knew someone else was there with me, and I hadn't exactly been making an effort to stay quiet. A few moments later, I could hear footsteps approaching the room I was in, so I shuffled myself as quietly as possible into the corner, out of sight from the doorway. I managed to pull myself between two file cabinets just as whoever was there stopped at the doorway. Feeling safe enough too, I pulled out my phone and texted my friend who was outside the building about what was happening. He had supposedly caused some sort of distraction, and I heard the person's footsteps running in my opposite direction to chase after him. Feeling confident the person was gone, I sprinted as fast as I could out of the building into a nearby bridge, where my friend and I had agreed to meet if we got separated. I waited for 10 minutes before my friend came running over to me. His face was pale white, and he said that the man chased him out of the building but disappeared into thin air after following him about 200 feet down the dirt road. We got out of there as fast as we could. Looking back at my photos later that day, I spotted a shadowy black figure in some of them that I know hadn't been there when I was taking them. Once we decided to conduct a theoretical experiment in a filled bath, we considered that, theoretically, a full bath of water contains atoms that were once part of a specific organism's body. In our case, we investigated the theory of the energetic connection of atoms with dead people whose atoms in this bath are more than the rest. We did everything that was needed. All we had to do was measure the magnetic fields and frequency in the bath. My task was to record it all on video and monitor it. As soon as it all started, our sensors jumped and began to squeak, and something fell in the next room. 15 minutes after this incident, we were all very scared in the bathroom. As soon as he began to flush the water, the light began to blink in the house, and the tap began to open and close in the bathroom. My friend told me that while he was flushing the water, something grabbed him under it, but I don't believe him. I saw a shadow figure standing in the corner watching me and a friend. I tried to move toward the shadow figure, thinking it was just a strange shadow, and I wanted to see what was casting it. It ran from me, and I tried to follow to see if it was real. I was in shock. I grabbed a camera and chased after. It ran into a different room and scared everyone in there. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a photo. The next morning, neighbors asked who ran out of our apartment that night because they saw someone in black. It was the one thing that seriously made me a believer. There were other events around that time, but they weren't really as impactful as that. As far as experiences in a haunted location, I gave a disembodied voice on camera. I'm walking down a hallway and hear a very loud hey in my ear. It comes through on the camera. About a 25-minute drive from my house is a huge graveyard. Where it's situated, there are no street lights or buildings, so it's super dark in there. I have visited the graveyard several times with my partner in the early hours of the morning. We never really saw anything but heard lots of things we couldn't explain. We could hear what sounded exactly like a bottle being rolled backwards and forwards. We'd locate the sound, but as we walked towards it, it suddenly sounded in another direction. It was a bit weird, but the scariest thing was when we were walking back to the car. There are hundreds of trees in this graveyard and hedges and bushes. Most of the trees had lost their leaves, so there were thousands piled everywhere. From nowhere we hear someone running through the leaves, and I felt it run right past me. The leaves it kicked up running past covered my trainers. I literally froze on the spot. I swear my heart stopped for a good few seconds. I was genuinely petrified because whatever it was running in our direction, and we had a torch. Whatever passed me didn't appear in front of us, but the sound of the running and leaves continued. I haven't returned to a graveyard at night since that incident, lol. I do wonder, though, why we would assume graveyards are haunted when these people didn't die there but were just laid to rest there. The town I grew up in has an old abandoned mansion that was always claimed to be haunted. The legend around town was that several suicides and a couple of murders had occurred on the premises. The most infamous of the murders involved a maid who pregnant by the original owner. His wife found out and later, she was left for dead, and the wife locked the door until her husband came home that evening. When they opened the door, the maid was ended. People in town were told that the maid was going back to Ireland when they asked where she went. That story came crashing down when her body was found by the gardener in the root cellar about 3 weeks later. The wife ended herself from a chandelier in the foyer the same day the gardener found the body, before the police could arrest her. The owner went to trial but was acquitted of all charges. He died in the house a few years later when he ended himself in the library. That's part of the legend surrounding the mansion. I've never been able to verify that it happened, but it was eventually sold to other people, and they also experienced misfortunes and deaths. In high school, a group of my friends and I decided to see if the legends were true one Halloween. We got inside and just explored for a bit before we started to call out for the maid who was ended. We heard a few footsteps. We wanted something more than that. We wanted to see a ghost, not just hear one walking around. We ended up provoking the resident spirits. We were idiots, and I admit that freely, and then down the hall we saw someone or something walking towards us. It got about 30 feet away, and we could make out that this wasn't a living human being. It was a pale, gaunt, shuffling thing that looked like a woman with eyes of the darkest black I'd ever seen. Then it screamed. We ran for our lives. We never went back there again. You couldn't pay me enough to go back either. That thing haunted my dreams for years, and I don't want to relive those nightmares ever again. I was part of a small ghost hunt at a historic mansion, and 3 of us were in the basement using a spirit box. During the session, a dark voice kept rising above the static and responding to our questions intelligently. At one point, the voice said, "You can see me. Look." I looked up, and a few feet away from where we sat, stood a full dark shadow in the form of a person. I could see the head, shoulders, and upper body. It was clear as day, and it was unmistakably a person made of pure blackness. I exclaimed loudly to my 2 companions about what I was seeing, never taking my eyes off of it. Before they could turn their heads to look, it simply blinked out of existence. Strangely, I did not feel afraid. What I did feel was a sense of recognition. As if I was somehow seeing something very familiar and expected. I know people will say whatever they want. But I am 100% certain that I saw what I saw, without a single doubt in my mind. I cannot explain it. I used to be a ghost hunter until my last encounter. My friends and I selected to visit Fort George near Niagara Falls, Ontario. We had researched that there were ghost sightings during the tours but did not know what we were going to see, if anything. When we first entered, one of my friends asked the group if we could smell the scent of blood, and I replied that we shouldn't joke about it because the air smelled crisp, like any fall night. As we joined our tour guide, one of my friends and I left the group during the night and started looking into all the windows of the barracks to see if we could see any ghost movements but found nothing. We rejoined our group and entered the barracks, which had seats inside for us to listen to the tour guide share the story of the war, the soldiers, and the deaths that have haunted others. The door was shut, and about 5 minutes in, I could feel a cold breeze go up my right arm and down my left arm, leaving goosebumps, while my palms were sweaty. I asked my girlfriend at the time if she felt the same thing, but her response was no. I asked my friends but received the same response. The phenomenon occurred a second time before it ceased. Near the end of the storytelling in the barracks, the guide mentioned there had been cases where ghosts had followed tourists home, but even at the time I was skeptical. We left the barracks, and the next stop was a solid stone tunnel that goes a short distance, and we were to enter single file. I felt claustrophobic walking through the pitch-dark tunnel while checking the walls to see if, like haunted houses, there would be a trapdoor, but the walls were solid stone. Upon walking back, my friend Jamie was being pushed into the wall, from the left side to the right side. I heard her say, "Stop messing around, Tom," but Tom said it wasn't him because he was behind me and no one was behind her. So we ran through the tunnel while telling others in front to move fast and get us out. As the tour finished, we hopped in our cars and headed home. While driving on the highway, it started to rain, and I had my windshield wipers working, but all of a sudden they stopped, and my GF asked what we should do since it was hard to drive when we could not remove the raindrops from my windshield. I was about to pull over, but my wipers started working again. This happened 2 times on our way home. I thought it was weird but continued and dropped my GF at home. When I arrived at my home and got ready to sleep, that's when the scariest shit happened. I felt the skin on my neck pull back, which made it hard to breathe, as if I were being choked by something invisible. I thought I was losing my mind and tried sleeping with the light on, but it continued happening as I was fighting for air. I left my home and thought no one would believe me and slept in my car at a Tim Hortons parking lot. Ghost hunting gone wrong. And I am freaking the hell out. So for context, I've been getting into paranormal ghost hunting. Mostly twin paranormal. I downloaded the app, and I used it with friends on Discord. So anyways, it seemed like the spirits wanted my friend. We were talking, and she knew every name that it spit out. It also said her legal name before she changed her name. I didn't know she had changed her name before, and we didn't even mention it once. Well, anyways. We did it again yesterday and got a lot of female name responses. It was around 8 p.m. The device said, "Get out," and shortly after I heard a loud bang/knock on my wall in my room. Freaked me the hell out. I was like, "Nope, I'm out," and shut the app off. It also said, "There is a shapeshifter here. Should I be concerned?" It also said boat, and I live near a dock with the Hudson River in NY. I had my first ghost hunting experience. I've got this crazy ghost story I want to share. It was the summer of 2017, and I was at one of my best friend Ed's house. His family and my family linked up a lot due to how close our families are with one another, but anyways. I want to say it was mid-July, shortly after my birthday. We were going to have a little fire in the yard and have a few beers. It started raining and rained for a couple of hours. It stopped raining, and I was getting ready to go home, but something made a weird noise outside, so Ed, his son Craig, and I went outside to see what it was. We found nothing out of the normal. We went to head inside, and I looked on the garage can lid, and I saw a handprint, a huge one. It had long nails and everything. It kind of freaked us out. So we kept looking around and saw something. We all saw the same thing. The door to the abandoned house next door opens, not a creep, but not real fast either. So we all looked at each other and decided whatever it was wants us to go in there. We grabbed better flashlights and some ghost hunting equipment we had. We wanted to get into ghost hunting anyways. Our first ghost hunt, cool, let's go. Craig went in first and was pushed against the wall in the living room and couldn't move. It took Ed, Ethan, Craig's friend, and me to pull him off the wall. We shook it off and started asking questions and using our EVP recorder. We didn't really catch much, nothing to excite us. So we started recording in night vision, and I went to the far bedroom. I was recording, asking questions, and doing whatever else ghost hunters do, looking for evidence of them. I turn to look into the closet of the room, and I see what looks like a witch, or something disguising itself as one. I panic and run out of the room to get Ed. Whatever it was knew a little too much about Ed's father, who had passed away some years ago. We were all scared at this point in time. So we wrap up and go to leave. I was the last one leaving the house, just to make sure everything was closed up, even though it was abandoned. We went out the side through the kitchen, so that's where we were exiting from, and I got shoved out of the house so hard I ended up hitting the ground on the way out the door. That's not even the worst part. After that there was a time period of probably 35 to 40 minutes that I can't recall anything from. I still don't know what happened within those 35 to 40 minutes, but when I came to, I was puking out what looked and felt like black tar. One of the scariest moments of my life. I returned to that house 3 times afterwards, but there was nothing there during those visits that resembled what I had experienced the first time. Ghost hunt story. My whole life I've had some experiences. The short story is, I was afraid because I was not aware of anything but the unknown. Here's my story about my first ever ghost hunt. A buddy and I bought tickets to do a ghost hunt at a local attraction. It was an investigation at this attraction that was known to have unexplained phenomena. The attraction is aviation-based and houses several authentic and vintage pieces of equipment from World War I and World War II. We began the night with an open but skeptical mind, assuming it was funhouse effect type stuff. We'd seen ghost hunters and understood the equipment. We also had no expectations. The investigation was, as we expected, about tour/equipment use. Having never been to the venue, it was cool to see the displays as well as the stories of the equipment believed to be behind the occurrences. We had some knocking and strange noises that weren't really explainable, however, they're forgettable. The night sort of ends in the banquet hall. They had dinner in the officers' mess. In it was a piano and the nose of a B-24. The entire room was World War II decor. My buddy and I chose to sit at the far back left corner of the room, away from everyone, because we assumed there were parlor tricks and wanted to debunk them. The rest of the group sat at various tables near the front of the room. During an EVP session, the piano started meekly playing a few keys. No one was sitting at it. There were knocks in response to questions. It was cool. I got up and walked from the table we were at to the B-24 nose just because I wanted to look at it. When I got within a foot of the nose, I felt like someone was behind me. I assumed it was my buddy and turned to see. When I turned around, there was a full white body that looked like a woman in a gown standing there. I could see through her, and I could definitely see my buddy sitting at the table 20 plus feet away. It struck me that I had a K2 meter in my hand, and I attempted to use it. By the time I brought it away from my hip, the figure was gone. No readings remained. Coolest experience on a ghost hunt. Haunted NC, graveyard. I have lived in NC all my life and have been in tune with the supernatural forever. Seeing weird things to me isn't uncommon, and I don't get spooked easily. In 2007, there was a significant increase in ghost hunting activity, and my cousin's friend claimed to have discovered a very creepy graveyard where a supposed witch was buried. I wanted to go because I feel people put negative names on individuals just because they didn't understand their holistic ways of life, and I wanted to let this woman know it was okay to cross over, that she had done nothing wrong. So first driving up, let me just say the road went from clear to foggy in a matter of seconds. As soon as we pulled up, you couldn't see through the darkness with a flashlight. Something sounded like it ran towards us, so I ran to the car and then worked up the nerve to walk back into the graveyard. As I made sure everyone wasn't walking on graves, etc., my friend, who was an atheist at the time, said he felt a presence in front of it, and he felt the urge to go find it. As I told him it was a bad idea, my camera decided to go off on its own. I look at the screen, and there's a pink orb over the grave. As I go to tell my cousin, I hear a little girl giggle, yet I know this is no little girl. Our stomachs literally drop as we hear a loud cackle follow immediately after. I swear I've never run so fast in my life. I feel so bad I didn't even get to speak my mind, but I feel bad knowing people probably have given the spirit a name and reputation that they feel helps them protect the sacred ground on which we stepped. Weird story about something that happened to me when my mother, an amateur paranormal investigator at the time, came home from an investigation on a Sunday morning. So this is a very strange story, but I'll try to cut right to the chase and not bother with nitty-gritty details. My mom got into paranormal investigations after she went to some paranormal powwow in my hometown when I was about 12. She continued to actually start a team and do paranormal investigations in the Midwest. Her team was called Wisteria Paranormal, maybe some of you are familiar? Anyways, I was about 14 years old and my mom had an investigation at this place called Willow's Weep somewhere in Indiana. I remember she was super excited about it, and it was actually going to be a 2-night investigation, which was huge for her team. She left Friday afternoon and was to return Sunday morning. She leaves, and I am home alone for the weekend, which was normal for her investigation weekends. So, Sunday rolls around and I always would stay up late and wait for her to come home so she could tell me about any experiences she had. I was always very enthusiastic about her stories. She pulls up to the house around 2 a.m. and is completely drained. She does very little talking and almost looks as if she is ill. I am not kidding when I say I don't think she said more than 3 words to me that morning. After unpacking, she goes to her room to sleep and closes the door behind her, really unusual for my mom. I think nothing of it and decide to go to the kitchen for something to eat before hitting the hay, and when I walk into the kitchen, I almost shit bricks. There were perfectly circular puddles of water everywhere. I mean literally everywhere. They varied in size, but they were perfectly round, all of them. I went down the hallway, and there are puddles down the hall too. I went ahead and checked the living room, and there was one huge puddle directly in the center of the room. I was pretty frightened, so I went to my mom's room to tell her, but her door was locked. Super weird. I even tried to bang on the door, but I think she was passed out cold. I decided to just sleep on it and catch her in the morning to show her. The next morning, all the puddles are gone. Mom is cooking breakfast. I asked her if she had seen the puddles, and she told me she had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. She said the floors were completely dry when she woke up. To this day, I have absolutely no idea what happened that night. The weirdest thing to ever happen to me. I love debunking supernatural claims, but one day we were looking at a house that the new owners said they just bought and wanted to get rid of because on their first night of staying, they kept having noises and doors and cupboard doors opening and closing on their own. The wife of the couple saw a girl in an old-looking white dress standing in the upstairs box room looking out of the window. The husband admitted that earlier he had thought he saw a girl in a white dress in the garden, but he assumed she was one of the neighbors. Well, it all sounded pretty textbook. We stayed the night in this house but never saw the girl, but unfortunately have no footage either. All the gear was off in the morning. I can't explain it, but all the sensors and cameras were turned off. They still had recording space and battery left, and even the stuff connected to the mains was turned off completely. Some cameras were tripped twice before shutting off, but nothing was captured. Another odd thing is if you look at the time they all tripped, it happened within 15 seconds of each other in the order of living room, stairs, landing, and box room, which, when tested, is exactly how we would trip the camera if we walked from the living room to the box room. No doors were left open, but when we entered the kitchen, all cupboard doors and fridge doors were wide open. That day we went around to ask neighbors if they knew who lived there before the current owner bought it. The most memorable of them was an old man who said, "Duck, no, there's a girl in white who stares at you through that window at night. No way in hell I'm going near that place." The current owners hadn't spoken to the neighbors either, so weirdly enough, the accounts matched. I never had the opportunity to see the house again because the owners claimed they had an accident and were unavailable to let us in, and then they sent another email stating that they would sell it instead. To this day I can't explain the stuff in that house, it all seems so surreal now. That one time I went ghost hunting. There is this large section of southwest Austin, Texas, that used to be known as the Eanes Marshall Ranch. There is a story to be found about a man who was ended by bandits, and his body was buried in an unmarked grave on the side of the dirt road after being discovered by the ranch owner. Eventually, The body was found by police over 100 years later while searching for evidence of deer poaching. Thus a local ghost story was reinvigorated and spread to a new generation. When I was in high school, my friends and I got it in our heads to go out there and do some ghost hunting before the house was torn down to make way for a church. We took a couple of disposable film cameras along with a Ouija board and headed out under the cover of night. We got there a little after 11. We hung around for several hours taking photos of nothing, literally pointing the cameras into the darkness and saying, "May I please take your picture?" Click. We had a no smoking rule, and we were not using the flash for the outside shots. We made our way inside the main house. The smallest member of the group shimmied through an unsecured window in a small side room and opened a door for the rest of us. We took some photos inside with the flash on. My friends spent a good bit of time on the Ouija board. I declined to participate in that part and went outside. They came out and claimed to have contacted an entity through the Ouija board. I was like, okay. Sure. We left after all the film was spent and we got bored. We never did hear the legendary wagon or horses. Nothing spooky happened while we were there. The next day the cameras were dropped off at Eckerd's to be sent off for development. A few days later the rolls came back with a lot of black nothing, which was to be expected when taking photos outside, at night, with no flash. There were a few shots that were taken inside the house while using a flash that had some things you could call orbs, but those can be explained away as dust or bugs. However, the photo still sends chills down my spine every time I see it. We were very strict about not using the flash outside and not smoking. We wanted to have our best chance at capturing something without having a seed of doubt that it could be a trick of the camera. Two of my friends who took part in the Ouija session had several unexplained glass-breaking incidents. They said it happened whenever they were talking about the entity or said its name. They were sitting in the car while parked when the passenger window formed spiderweb cracks, like a rock had hit it, but no impact was heard. A few days later several glass cups fell out of their kitchen cabinets, no fronts, just open shelves, when no one was in the kitchen and all cats were in the living room with them. More than a few of their picture frames had the glass shatter while still hanging on the wall. When they stopped mentioning the entity's name, the activity calmed down and eventually stopped. I've had other experiences when I was younger that I cannot explain away. I don't need you to believe me. I shared this for those of us who have had strange, unexplainable things happen to let them know they're not alone. I put my testimony out there to show that not all of us who have claims of experiencing the paranormal are suffering from some kind of hallucination or mental illness. There are many things that scientists haven't been able to figure out or explain. Paranormal researcher. This got me into the field. One night I was in distress and lay on my bed crying my eyes out. Next thing I know, I feel a hand on my back going up and down. I went to roll over to see who it was, and no one was there. This was 8 p.m., this was the first out of two. The next night I was woken up by the bed corner sinking down. The backyard light is right next to the window, it didn't go off, and the hall light was on. Brothers wanted it on because they are scared, so I was able to see my room without worry. I wish I had pictures of the room and the layout. But both times, it was bright enough to see the difference and not a shadow. You know, you guess if it's a person or your jacket hanging up. Had an uncle come up with his then fiancée, they went upstairs to crash out in the bedroom. As soon as they got to the top step, the door opened up. Since I wasn't there, I am skeptical about it. But there you have it. I moved out in 1996. Haven't done ghost hunting, but I did have a paranormal investigator in my house that was a retired cop. I was really clear when I told him I didn't want him antagonizing whatever was there, and he didn't listen. So, some advice, don't be confrontational. It's about the same as being confrontational with a drunk, abusive husband and then just leaving. What do you think happens after that? Don't leave the person/family in a bad situation. Be respectful. Things can follow you home. That's what happened to the paranormal investigator that came to my house. He suddenly left after 45 minutes, leaving some of his equipment behind. Called me a couple days later to tell me he had negative activity at his house and then blocked me on everything. Not everything negative is a demon, so don't start throwing the word demonic around. Don't scare people. Think about all the really terrible people you have encountered. They are no different in death than they are in life. Keep an open mind. We really don't know what causes that sort of activity. If someone says they have experienced different types of activity, it may be related. Some things just don't seem to make any sense or fit in with what you think is going on. Make note of things whether or not they fit your belief system. People describe things the best way they can. Don't just listen to their words, and look for contradictions, and interrogate them. Listen to what they are trying to say. They called you for help. Read up on the hitchhiker effect. There are plenty of entities, or whatever they are, That guff about Jesus. It's about the force of your will and the will of the people there. Also, some people really don't want those to leave. For all kinds of different reasons. Silence implies consent. If you notice something messing with you, speak up. Tell it to stop. Just wanted to share my first paranormal investigation. Funny thing is, I've always had a knack for attending haunted old schools ever since middle school. I joined the paranormal club at my school, and today we conducted our first investigation in a building that is quite old, though not as old as those on the East Coast. It is still about a century old. The building we were investigating was a recently renovated structure that replaced a very old building, which, like all other stories, had incidents of people dying in it. It's a simple lecture hall, but it is infamous for reports from janitors and other workers who have demanded to relocate due to unsettling occurrences, such as a mop moving on its own or sightings of a dark figure at the end of the hall. You see, they investigated here along with Scrabble pieces, Ouija boards, and other seances and got a response spelling black dog, which is an omen of death. Supposedly, if you see a black dog apparition and gaze into its red eyes, you or a person you love will die within a week. While obviously no one died, one person did dream of a black dog and saw the reflection but not directly of its amber eyes, and the next day he got a call saying his baby brother had almost died when two bees stung him right under his eyes. But this was last year. Besides this, they didn't have much activity on the EMF or EPV going on other than asking yes-no questions, which they answered as all yeses. This excited me a little for my first investigation. After the initial tour of the building at 1 a.m., we camped out until around 3:30 a.m. for the witching hour, but activities started much earlier in intense waves. The earlier group, who arrived around 7 p.m., reported experiencing growling during an EVP session. The group right after, at around midnight, reported the first big sighting of the day, which was a blood-curdling scream heard by both teams on the second and third floors. Our leader mentioned that on the second floor window, he detected intense waves of EMF, around 1.90, I forgot the units, which is high, as even 0.10 is considered intense, and had red beeping all over the place, and then suddenly saw a clear head of a woman peering through, but it was pretty dang high up. My time slot was 1 to 3 a.m., so hearing all this made me excited as things are actually happening. So we go to one of the most haunted locations, which is next to the third floor lobby where they laid out the Scrabble pieces. There was a long wait to get the EMF to detect anything when all of a sudden, a large spike occurred, and being an amateur, the questions that I asked the spirit were jumbled and incoherent, sadly, but I don't believe I angered them. The spirits we encountered, as explained by our leader, were likely malevolent, as they appeared to be old spirits from the 1910s or 1920s who held extreme racist and homophobic views. Therefore, anyone who was not a straight white person would either be growled at or cause the EMF to react wildly when holding it. However, it does not have enough power to curse or follow us, as we disinvited them from doing so. The craziest thing is that the group on the other side of the third floor had a spike but asked them if they'd rather talk to the people, us, on the other side, and as soon as they said so, their EMF went back to 0 while it was us who got the spike. A physical sighting occurred 3 times, including the head of the woman peering through the window. We received another report stating that when someone reached the first floor and sat in one of the seats, they saw a girl with fading hair sitting cross-legged who was not part of their group. However, when they looked back, no one was there. Another witness reported seeing the same girl on the third floor, sitting alone in a dark conference room until she vanished again. The biggest sighting was someone who saw the whole figure standing and walking away, unable to follow. The scream resulted right after. One more thing I'd like to say is that they heard footsteps on top while on the third floor, but there were no more floors. Just a roof. And supposedly, one person saw the elevator sign say 4, while 3 was the highest it could physically possibly go, not some hidden access floor. Thankfully, I was able to return safely with no signs of spirits lingering, and I'm glad to have had this experience. While sadly I wasn't able to witness any physical sightings or the scream, I was able to note the EMF spike and attempt to converse with them. Very exciting. One of their primary locations during the semester is in New Orleans, but to be honest, I am too scared to go there. I have many stories of ghost experiences, but one college story spanned over 2 years. I was on FaceTime with my, now former, roommate once while we were all home for the holidays. My roommate said they heard something strange in their attic and decided to investigate, even though I, who have always lived in a haunted house, advised against it. They did anyway. They then began texting me all the time, complaining about seeing and hearing things. I asked them to tell it to go away, they didn't, and named the entity. 2 days later, we were back in our apartment. My partner, who lived with us, began complaining about hearing my voice or my roommate's voice while he showered. I began to hear it too, but with my roommate's voice only. Late at night, I would hear my roommate's closet door open and slam shut and hear their laughter until I texted them asking them to politely quiet down, as I had a class the next day. My roommate sent me a snap of himself at work and expressed complete confusion about what I was referring to. We didn't have neighbors since the rooms next to us had been vacant, and the new tenants weren't moving in for another few weeks on either side. So I got up and went into my roommate's room. Their closet door was wide open, but otherwise everything looked normal. COVID hit, and my roommate couldn't justify staying in the apartment when the lease came to an end. Especially since the rest of the school was closed for the foreseeable future. They moved out while my partner and I apartment hunted because we didn't want to go back to living with our parents. We found a place and quickly moved in. Smaller than our last place. I began to have sleep paralysis. I heard my former roommate's voice and my partner's voice whenever I showered. My partner mentioned the same thing. We had the same encounters, but with each other's voices. We would hear the locked bathroom door open and shut and the call of our names. We would always respond and then peek out the shower curtain to see the door is still closed and locked. Many sleepless nights together there and other reasons caused us to move out again. Our lease was terminated early because the apartment building failed to inform us about the construction of a rooftop bar that would share a wall with our unit, and their offer of a coupon to the bar constituted a breach of trust, legally permitting us to move out without penalty. My partner's parents allowed us to stay in their lake house while we searched for a new place, as it was conveniently located near my workplace and the school. But again, we had the same problems of hearing voices when alone. I remember our bedroom door was closed, and I awoke to a loud banging and someone yelling at us to wake up. I thought it might have been my partner's mother since the voices sounded like a muffled version of hers. I woke up, and my partner had told me no one was there and that before closing the door, after I had gone to bed, they saw a figure run from their sister's room and into their parents' room. Completely freaking us out. Our final move for college was a week later, and we didn't have any problems with that entity again. That had to have been the most malicious feeling I've ever experienced. Like I said, I have tons of ghost stories, but none have ever copied voices of those I know and love before. Weird, haunted house. Okay, so when I was younger, my two friends and I always slept over at one of their apartment complexes. She lived in a neighborhood with a big white clubhouse that could be rented out for parties, birthdays, etc. We had walked by the house multiple times on our way to the pool and always felt an eerie vibe from it. One time we were walking laps around the pool/house, and my friend said the chair that you could see through the window had moved from earlier, which was weird, and a few weeks later, as we were walking to the pool, we saw a strange man lurking around the house. Coming back from the pool, we saw the door was cracked open. That night we had decided we wanted to investigate, so we snuck out and crept to the house. There was a really strange vibe. As we walked there, something fell out of a tree. It was a featherless baby bird that had had its eyes ripped out and was bleeding all over the sidewalk. We were so freaked out. We walked to the back of the house, and I saw a room with lights on. As I looked up, I saw a chubby man chopping something with a butcher knife in the window. I was frozen. Suddenly her mom came and grabbed us and took us home. The time was around midnight. As we went home, she warned us she also felt something was off about that house. This is one of those unexplainable stories that still scares me to this day. Paranormal experience that happened long ago. I want to know what others think. Okay, so recently I've been thinking about this experience, and it gives me goosebumps. I'm a logic-based person and really try to approach these unexplainable events with Occam's finest razor. I find a lot of people in this community are similar, and I really want to share this with everyone who uses reason to try and help me either validate or dismiss this. Backstory: my friend, we'll call him Fred, and his mother lived in their house for many years prior to me meeting him. I met him in 6th grade, we're 35 now, and he's still my best friend to this day. Both he and his mother swore up and down that his house was haunted. All through high school we'd hang out at his house, and I never had an experience. He ended up going to college in Louisiana but would visit on holidays. This experience happened in December 2006, he was coming home from college for winter break. He brought a friend from college with him too, we'll call him John. Experience: we decided to try and coax a reaction from this ghost since nobody but Fred and his mom had seen anything. We were 18 and foolish, so we had a Ouija board, I know, but it was fun, and candles. We were sitting in his room, it was after midnight, I'm sure, because his mom was already asleep. We were burning a candle in a thick glass coaster designed for candles. We were playing with the Ouija board, and the flame flickered a bit, but whatever, it was just a draft. Then the coaster popped clean in half, no shards, just pop. My first thought is that this was just heat transfer and the coaster couldn't handle it. At least, that's what I tell myself. The candle was not low, so 1. I don't see how it could have transferred that much heat, and 2. Those are specifically designed for candles. I'd have to imagine that the amount of heat it would take to cause this to happen would be far greater than anything a candle could emit. Sure, it was December, but we live in Texas, so it wasn't that cold. It definitely wasn't cold enough to cause such shock on the glass. Even with those two considerations, I'm still able to dismiss this as physics, however unfavorable the conditions for such a reaction were. Here's the part that sends chills down my body 17 years later. I had my laptop, 2006 HP, and was searching how to perform a seance. When I got to the website and clicked the link for instructions, my laptop shut down immediately. The page didn't even load. I rebooted my laptop and noticed that the Wi-Fi button had been turned off. I pressed it and it lit up, but I still could not connect to Wi-Fi. I had to go into the control panel and re-enable the Wi-Fi radio. It had been completely shut off. I was finally able to get connected again, so I reloaded the website and attempted to click the link again. As soon as I clicked the link, the lights in his room dimmed and we heard footsteps running down the hall. We freaked the duck out, and I'm still covered in goosebumps just typing this. John, who isn't as big a believer, immediately opened the door and went out into the dark living room, telling the ghost to show itself. We followed sheepishly and noticed that his mom was still in her room sleeping. There's no way she could have dimmed the lights, but even if she could have magically phased through the wall to adjust the lights, she absolutely could not have run and made it back to her room to act asleep that quickly. Not to mention her room was out and to the right, but the footsteps clearly traveled left down the hallway. I had experiences in that home afterward, but none nearly as terrifying as this one, just mainly feelings and sounds. His mother moved a few years later and hasn't had any experiences since. I know this all sounds crazy, and objectively I wouldn't believe it if I read it. All I can say is that the feelings I had that night were very real and continue to spook me when I think of it today. His mother is basically my second mother. I trust her 10,000%, and she has told me other stories of experiences, but since I wasn't there, I don't want to share them because I can't verify them. I do know that she would sleep with a knife under her pillow. Not that it would help against a ghost, but it probably provided some comfort. It makes her sound nutso, but, and I know this is rich coming from a random person on the internet, she is not by any means nutty. Like I said, I love her as a second mom and trust her just as much. Just wanted to share, as I've never shared about this anywhere and I've only talked about it with close friends and relatives. Ghost hunting experience. So 2 of my friends and I went ghost hunting, which is really just us walking around in haunted places and leaving 10 minutes later, in San Antonio this past weekend, and normally things go well. We pretend like we felt something scary and then laugh it off and go to the next location, but this time was a little different for me. We found out about an old abandoned insane asylum, I think it was abandoned in the 90s, that is supposedly extremely haunted, and we decided to try and find it. When we got to the street that we found on maps, I felt a pit in my stomach. This was different than all of the other times we had gone to haunted locations. I knew something bad happened close to where we were. I was anxious, I'm not going to lie, but I'm also the type of person to watch horror movies by myself and lead my friend group into a haunted house. The anxiety level I was feeling was similar to waiting outside of a haunted house, so for me, it wasn't too extreme. Suddenly, while we are driving, tears begin to stream down my face. I wasn't crying out of fear or anxiety. I've felt that before. My feelings weren't extreme enough in that moment to be crying like how I was. I wasn't sobbing, I was just having a normal conversation with my friends, but my eyes were just crying. It felt like it was out of my control. I couldn't stop it either. We ended up going back to my friend's place because we couldn't see the asylum, and it was also getting late. When we got back to her place, we found the actual address for the asylum, and it was on the other side of the trees where I started crying. I realized we were near the location when I began to cry, yet we were actually right beside it, and none of us had any awareness of it. That was the strongest paranormal experience I've ever had, and I'm so lost on what it could mean, also considering seeing spirit/medium/witchcraft runs in my family. Does anyone have any idea? Freshman year ghost hunting. My friend Angela and I both had a huge fascination with the spiritual/paranormal/pseudoscientific. We were bored one night, late fall/early winter, at her boyfriend's apartment. We decided to go ghost hunting, as there was nothing else to do in rural Missouri. The school we went to was about 5 miles away from an older cemetery. So we called up 2 other friends, Mike and Haley, jumped in the car, and drove over to the cemetery. We brought a camera and a voice recorder, totally professional. So we get to the cemetery, and the gates are locked up. After a bit of talking, trying to figure out what to do, Mike scales the fence and runs all over the cemetery. While he's doing that, I walk over to the opposite side with Haley to make sure nobody catches him. All of a sudden I have this huge wave of nausea come over me, to the point where I have to throw up. I'm a big boy with a strong stomach. It takes a lot to get me to throw up. Angela starts getting an overpowering scent of lavender. Remember, it's fall/winter, everything is dead at this point, and there are no flowers anywhere. We decide things have gotten a bit too freaky, so we nope the hell out. Down the road from the cemetery is an abandoned building that used to be an English as a second language building for international students. This building has been abandoned for years. Nobody goes there. We park the car and begin to shine flashlights in the windows. The building has 2 glass doors on the front. I decide to shine my light on them. All we see is the figure of a person with their hands up against the door. We can't see a face, only shadows. Again, we nope TF out. We stopped at a few more places during the night, and nothing else really terrifying happened that made us want to nope TF out. Angela got pushed to the ground by something outside a Lutheran church and school. We stopped at an empty lot and took pictures. At one point, one of the backgrounds in the picture went completely black and then reappeared when Mike stepped out of the frame. The last really freaky thing that happened was when we got back to the boyfriend's apartment. We all fell asleep. Haley woke up in the middle of the night and said she saw the figure of a man reflected in the TV. The next morning Angela told us she woke up thinking someone was standing over her bed. Delusional? Maybe. Ghosts? Upon reflection, the possibility seems unlikely. It's fun to think about every now and then, though. Creepy setting. Just as good exists, so does evil. I have personal opinions on both subjects, in which I feel both should be respected. I've never been the type of person who might glorify wickedness or any form of paranormal entities. Nevertheless, don't mess with it or try to understand it. Things of that nature, I feel, should be left unknown and unexplored. However, there are those moments where curiosity sometimes overtakes the mind and the wanting of knowing suddenly becomes a necessity. Well, let's just say we should be careful how far we push into these mysterious events. We wouldn't want to draw its attention towards us, now would we? I used to work at a senior living home. This building had 3 floors in use. 2 of those floors were for seniors who self-cared, and others needed standby assistance. Then we had the memory care floor. It only took for me to work there one night to know there was a very off feeling about that floor. So I decided to stick to the 1st and 3rd floors instead. There were several nights when the elevator on the 3rd floor opened and closed on its own. At first I thought maybe someone was getting in. But each time I would go take a look, the doors were closing, and I never got to see who was inside. Until one night during my shift I grew tired of hearing the elevator open and close several times throughout the night as usual. It was about 3:20 a.m., so I decided to go over to our med tech on duty and ask what residents left the floor constantly through the night. She looked at me weirdly as if I had spoken another language. "Nobody leaves this floor during the night," she said. I laughed and replied, "Well, someone is because the elevator keeps opening and closing." She brushed it off, saying the building is old and it might just be that the elevator is beginning to show signs of not working appropriately. I gave her a smile, hiding the concern of this actually being something more than just a dysfunctional elevator. But I too brushed it off and decided to not pay attention to it. The following night I heard the elevator open again. However, this time I heard the rattling sound it makes each time weight is being added onto it. You know, as if someone had gotten in. I decided to investigate this time, but the doors had closed once again before I was able to see who had gotten inside. So I stood nearby, leaning against the wall, patiently waiting for it to open again. Nothing happened. Frustrated about the entire ordeal, I rolled my eyes and headed into the bathroom. The moment I came back out there it was. The noise again of someone getting inside the elevator and the door about to close. This time I was near it all I had to do was take a couple more steps to be able to see it. So I did. The doors were almost closing as I bravely glanced inside. There was no one there. A resident later told me strange things always happen in that building and that it actually used to be a hotel back in the early 60s. Who knows? Maybe it was just a really old building, and since my shift was overnight, my mind was playing tricks on me due to tiredness. But just maybe. There's something else lurking in that building. Something that might feel like it's at home and we are just simply its guests. One of my ghost hunting experiences. One of my best friends is into ghost hunting and the paranormal. I have been on a few ghost hunts with him. Only 4 or 5, 2 in particular have stood out in my mind. Last night, while watching a few episodes of a well-known TV series on Prime, I suddenly remembered one of these ghost hunts. This is an experience that changed my entire view of the paranormal. So my friend, let's call him Bob, invited me to a ghost hunt. I know that I was there with Bob and a woman we shall call Sally. Sally was / is a Wiccan. There were a few other people there, but I can't remember them, and they bear no importance in this tale. They may have a tale of their own, but I never got to hear it. Anyway, on a Saturday night, we met at Sally's house and waited until it was dark. Then we drove to some woods where there had been a few, maybe more than a few, suicides in the past, mainly involving rope and a tree. At the start of the night, I was wondering what I had gotten myself into, as I just had images of it being a boring night in the woods. After parking the cars, we climbed the fence / gate / stile, I can't remember, and entered the woods. It was very quiet, and the footpath seemed to lead into the darkness. Following the footpath seemed easy. However, at one point I lost everyone. I had gone too far ahead, and decided to head back. This seemed hard to do, the ground was flat, but turning back I seemed to meet resistance. It was like climbing a mountain. I could go further into the woods really easily, with no effort, but going back was not easy. So I just waited, and eventually they caught up. I mentioned this to Bob, and he said that he also experienced the same sensation. Bob, and Sally ended up splitting from the others, as they just wanted to hang back and take a few photos. So on we went, leaving them behind. After a point, we could see a bit of a clearing in the woods, and I could swear I could see people or shadows moving. Sally said, quite possibly, and also said it was the eve of something. I cannot remember the details, but it was like something you would read in a fairy tale. Anyway, Bob, who is also a medium, said to go and have a look, which Sally advised against. I and Bob moved forward, and then the shadows vanished. Bob was freaking out a bit and said something about a man with a melting face. I thought, okay, well, nothing is here, and I moved forward. It was like I was in a dream at that point. I was just floating and moving. I had never practiced meditation then. I have started recently, but that is the best way to describe how I felt. I lost all awareness. At some point I could hear Bob and Sally shouting my name, and I came back to reality. I had no idea where I was or how far I had gone. I don't know how I got to where I was. Bob and Sally said they had been following me for a while, shouting my name. I know at the time, I looked at my watch and was shocked, but I do not remember the specifics. We headed back to the others, who were still standing or sitting around, saying that it had been a quiet evening and nothing had happened. We headed back to the cars. 1 or 2 hours had passed by this point, but I cannot remember anything of significance other than what I have already said. When we got back to the fence, we stood talking for a while. Then I entered another trance state, and when I came to, I was trying to climb a tree. Bob said he had been talking to me, only it was not me, it was someone / something else. We then decided to leave. I was freaking out a bit. After we climbed the fence and got back onto the road, I had an urge to take one last look at the tree. I wish I had taken a camera, so back I went. Just as I got to the fence, there was a big black dog looking at me. After a while it just disappeared. I was off to the car straight away. We drove through some village, and I had a massive feeling of dread that something was following. Sally performed an exorcism or something along those lines. I am no expert in the magical arts, and all was good again. Like I said before, this is one of 2 experiences that changed my views a lot. Territorial Spectre. Crescent Hotel, if you know this name, you probably know its dark past and the ghost stories associated with it. For those who don't recognize it, the Crescent Hotel is located in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, and is a great destination to enrich yourself in history and architecture, as well as the shudder-inducing entities that roam its hallways. At the time I visited the hotel, I was 16 and was accompanying my best friend and her parents on a cool Halloween night to take the ghost tour that the hotel offers. There, you can learn firsthand the history and experiences of each floor, which includes the basement. I'll spare most of the details but highly encourage those listening to research or even visit the place. When we arrived, my friend and I were ecstatic to be ghost hunters and were challenging each other to see who could get the best evidence possible. As her parents got us all registered, they said that we could go check out the hotel but just to be back within 30 minutes to begin the tour. We, already running towards the stairs, gave a quick yeah sure and whipped our cameras out. Because we didn't want to ruin our excitement, we promised one another that we wouldn't research anything about the rumored ghosts and so had no clue who or what was where. On the second floor, my friend walked faster, taking pic after pic, while I slowed down and enjoyed the scenery. The place was gorgeous, especially with the wedding that was happening downstairs. My head circled around as I observed all around me with excitement. That excitement, however, slowly was extinguished as anxiety began to bubble in my stomach. I walked slowly in front of one of the rooms near a well-lit staircase that went down to the first floor and heard some footsteps to my left. By this point, The anxiety I was feeling had made me nauseous, and it literally felt like someone was just punching me in the gut repeatedly. Swiveling my head towards the sudden sound, I saw a very large jet black figure race up the stairs and towards me. Large enough to where it blocked out all of the light in the stairwell. Flinching, I backed up a step or two and looked around to see that my friend and I were still the only ones in the hallway at that time. I quickly caught up with her and asked if she had seen or felt anything unusual, to which she replied, "Not at all." What's wrong with you? Why are you so pale?" I brushed it off and waited until we caught up with her parents and told all three of them what had happened to me. As I walked away from that room/stairwell, my nausea and gut-punching pain had subsided. Flash forward to the tour. We began at the top of the building, and the guide gave us the details on which rooms were haunted, who haunts them, and why they supposedly haunt those rooms. As we all filed into the second floor, my friend's dad elbowed me and said with a smirk, "Hey, I wonder if the room you were talking about is the room." I laughed it off as much as I could, but the closer we got to that room, the more I began to feel that anxiety/gut punch feeling again. As luck would have it, the guide stopped immediately in front of the door where I had my experience. She told the crowd about a young man that haunts the room. I don't recall what his name was, but he was around 18 when he died. His death was due to him falling off a ladder while he was trying to impress some girls during the construction of the hotel. As he hit the ground, a nail went into his skull. He's known for being quite the troublemaker and will pick on any young men that he thinks may be trying to steal his girls from him, joked the guide. My face went pale and cold as this suddenly made perfect sense, but I couldn't help but laugh at the situation. As funny as it seems, I waited for the group to move ahead and leaned in towards the door and said, "Hey, just so you know, my friend and I aren't together. I'm not straight, actually, you can have her, I guess." I hurriedly caught up with the tour group. It was so odd the rest of the tour. Even in the pitch-dark basement, where supposedly some bodies were kept, I didn't have anywhere near the same reaction as I did walking around the second floor. College. There's this one haunted suite in one of the old dorms. It's completely blocked off. The only way you can break in is through the suite next to it, which, ironically, was a designated party suite. A student ended their life in that suite around 30 years ago and has haunted it since. Eventually, none of the other suite mates or anyone else could live in it, so the college blocked it off. My friend once sneaked into that suite with a number of other people. She said the whole place was empty as expected, except there's a single chair in the middle of the common room. That chair was said to be there so that the spirit of the student could sit without disturbing those around. Some people said it was the chair the student used to hang himself. My friend and the other people brought an Ouija board with them and used it to talk to the spirit. They didn't get any concrete answers but could confirm through yes/no questions that they were indeed talking to that student's spirit. Before they could ask more questions, a door violently slammed itself in front of their faces. Absolutely no wind since the entire place was sealed off, and they checked every single room to make sure no one was there when they first came in. At that, they bolted. High school. I taught at a small high school for a few years. The building was pretty new and in good condition. My classroom was fine. No paranormal vibe at all, at first. A few months into the school year, I brought in 2 portraits of 2 politicians/activists to hang on the wall, one man and one woman. I taught social studies, and they were very relevant to my lessons. I hung them on 2 pieces of metal that were drilled into the wall using round hooks. One of them, the portrait of the woman, kept falling off the wall. I had carpeted floors, so they weren't damaged, just annoying. My coworkers joked that a weird ghost was haunting my room. None of the windows in this entire building could be opened, so I couldn't blame it on the wind, and they fell when I was in the room with the door closed, so I literally had no idea what caused it. One day, I was not in the mood, so as soon as I heard the portrait fall one more time, I cursed the ghost out, saying it was disrespectful toward the female activist. I didn't actually believe there was a ghost haunting my room, I just yelled into the void out of frustration. After that, the wall clock that had been fine suddenly began to fall down multiple times a week. One day, one of my coworkers whose room was next to mine pulled me into her room and told me this. Both of our rooms were probably haunted. The person using the room before me was very uneasy and always found excuses not to be alone in it. Before I came, her room was very haunted. One time, the hallway camera captured footage of the doorknob turning by itself while absolutely no person was even near that wing. After I came, my room became the active one with all the stuff falling off the wall. I was moved to a different room the year after and never had an issue. Later I found out the school building used to be a dingy orphanage. An investigator's origin ghost story. Ever since I was able to walk through the Blockbuster and look at the horror movie titles, I've been interested in monsters, ghosts, the paranormal. I was able to catch unsolved mysteries a lot and always waited up just to see if they had any of the ghost story episodes. You had to wait through the missing persons ones to get to the scary ones while getting yelled at to go to sleep at 9 p.m. I hadn't experienced anything until I was around 7 to 8 years old. This happened in our first house, and I didn't know anything about its history yet. My grandmother and I were very close, and one night she stayed really late, and I suggested that she stay in my room like a sleepover. My parents brushed it off and told me to get ready for bed and go to sleep. It'll happen if it happens. Sure. That night I fell asleep without anyone in the room, but I woke up a couple of hours later. I looked around and didn't see my grandma but definitely heard her breathing heavily to the side of my bed. Sweet. She actually stayed the night. This is so cool. I remember distinctly thinking that I didn't want to wake her. She was almost snoring. Comforted and happy, I went back to sleep. When I woke up the next day, expecting to have a conversation or go to breakfast together, she wasn't there. No sleeping bag. Whatever, maybe she's already downstairs. I get out of bed ahead of my parents, and the house is deserted. They're sleeping. It was at that point that I realized my grandmother hadn't spent the night, and something was clearly in my room. I didn't go back into that room for the rest of the day and learned to secure the closet door by making sure I hear it click, which I still do to this day to all doors before I go to sleep. The only other instance I experienced in that house was several years later. One night I woke up way past midnight, and I heard my name being called. A distinct female voice, faint but loud enough to carry tone through the walls. Now I could have been dreaming and heard this. I actually got up to go see what it was. Absolutely nothing was going on, so I headed back to my room. It stands out in my mind as if it was real because I wasn't afraid, and I was treating it like someone could have needed help, and only my parents called me by my full name. It turns out that my parents had experienced multiple paranormal events in that house and just never told me. While we were moving in the late 90s, my parents shared stories about hearing an old woman humming frequently, my mother witnessing an apparition in the same area where I heard my name called, and my mother's nutcracker collection moving on its own. They turned inside their glass case, sometimes completely backwards. We didn't have the means to film this at the time, but looking into it further, that could have been caused by vibrations from walking around. Now we've moved into a new house. About a year into this, I hear that local legend says there's a teenage girl buried in our crawl space. Not believing that, I investigate the basement and find that it's plausible because the basement has an opening into a crawl space that's just dirt and gravel. The people who told us about the legend had never been in the house, so how could they possibly know? This stayed as a legend in my mind until one night around the early 2000s. I was avoiding homework and playing on my laptop. Since no one else had reliable internet yet, I was playing retro games, in this case, Star Wars Dark Forces. My bed was centered in the room again, the headboard against the far wall and the foot visible from the door off to the right. Now, I should be studying or at least sleeping because I commuted to college in the morning, so my father would check on me if he saw light under the door. I'd be greeted by a what the hell and a go to sleep. This time, I was not at my desk but prone on the bed, lights out, headphones on, fully immersed in laying waste to stormtroopers. Then I got the ankle shake. Damn it, he must have heard all the clicking. It kept going, so I was like, yeah, I get it. I take the headphones off and turn around, and there's no one there, it's pitch black. Very calmly but quickly, I pulled my legs up away from the edge of the bed and turned on the lights. My door is halfway shut but open. Now remember, I specifically shut my doors as a habit before I go to sleep hard enough to ensure they latch properly. My parents were deeply asleep. It is impossible that my father could have moved without my awareness, as my heart and mind shifted from 0 to 100 in approximately 2 seconds. Final experience, thanks for sticking it out for so long. At some point I'm up late, and I keep hearing footsteps going up and down the stairway to the second floor. I can't see it from where I'm at, and after years of learning how to stay quiet and be alert for noises, I expect someone to turn the corner and lecture me on sleep, but nothing happened. I get up to look around the corner, no one is up, and my parents' door is shut tight. This has happened multiple times, whether it be the stairs, the hallway leading to the stairs, or the hallway between the bedrooms. Distinct footsteps that are both heard and felt will occur when you're alone or everyone is sleeping. No doors open, no toilets flush, nothing but the movement. This still occurs occasionally to this day. After I started doing paranormal investigations soon after my experiences, I dug into my second house's past. Turns out the murder occurred in my house, but the victim was buried/hidden in the crawlspace of my neighbor. He was mentally unstable and ended the daughter of the resident of my house. Both were preteens. This happened now, over 50 years ago. Regardless of all of these experiences, I tend to be a skeptic and only accept the pieces of evidence that I can challenge repeatedly without explanation. I believe something is out there that we don't understand, but I'll believe it's a disembodied energy from a parallel dimension before I'll believe the dead are returning. I've done paranormal investigations since 2000 but really got into it in 2012. Sure, I've got experiences from that as well, but this is my own story that got me into the paranormal. This has gone on long enough. Thanks for listening. I bought and renovated an older home, built in 1937. The home had so much character, and it had been neglected for decades, it broke my heart. I researched and hunted down era-appropriate finishes and poured my heart into that home. I always felt like I was being watched, though, and would hear knocks and footsteps going up and down the stairs. One night I was dreaming, random stuff. Like lollipop fields and unicorn stuff, and all of a sudden there was an older woman in my dream. She was very out of place, so it caused me to pause and then panic. I remember shouting at her, "You're the ghost in my house." To which she replied, "I'm a grandmother." That calmed me down, and I had a conversation with her. She told me her name was Sophia Anderson and that she had built and lived in this house with her husband and son. Her husband had been a foreman at the local mine, which operated about 10 kilometers away. I then woke up and wrote everything down. I reached out to the local historical society, who confirmed that the original owners of the house were a Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, and they provided an original picture of the home. I then went to the mine museum and was able to confirm a foreman with the last name of Anderson. I like to think that Sophia loved seeing her home return to its former glory, and it was with a heavy heart that I eventually sold it. After that dream, when I would hear knocks and footsteps, I would say out loud, "Hello, Sophia, I hope you're doing well." Well, I finally saw my first. Something weird? Ghost? I don't know. I was out shooting in a 15th century mansion in Britain the other night for a ghost show. Now, I am as skeptical as they come. The show is quite silly and lighthearted. I have never seen anything paranormal before, and to be honest, despite being in a haunted mansion, I still didn't expect to see anything. But there was one point during the night, maybe about 9 p.m., when I looked up to the balcony above the main staircase where we were shooting and saw something strange. There was sort of a black, shadowy, cloudy thing moving around. It stayed in the same basic spot but was moving a bit from side to side. And it wasn't a solid shadow. The whole thing was sort of wavy. In the room with me at the time was the sound guy and one camera operator. It was not a brief encounter. I got a good solid look at it for 10 to 15 seconds, even shining my phone light up at it, where it remained visible. It eventually moved away to the right side and was gone. We went upstairs to investigate. The only source of light up there was coming from a skylight with some outside electric lighting. But there was nothing obscuring the light source. No trees or anything that would be casting a shadow. Very puzzling, but we eventually dismissed it as maybe something, a bat or bird or something, was casting a weird shadow up there. I thought nothing more of it. Until yesterday. My co-host was back in the mansion shooting an unrelated music video for a band in the same room where I saw it. We run a production company. He didn't tell the clients that the place was haunted or that we did a ghost show in our spare time. Anyway, at one point during the filming in the staircase room, the bass player looked up, got startled, and blurted out in shock something to the effect of "What the hell is that?" He then described a wavy, shadowy shape in the exact same spot as I saw it. It shits my co-host up big time, and I have been covered in goosebumps ever since he told me about it. I'm not saying it's a ghost or whatever, but that has absolutely chilled me to the bone. I have no idea what it could have been. But yeah. Anyone else seen anything like that? I'm a calm, rational person, but this one has me stumped. We went on a ghost hunt in rural Sweden. So a few years ago, 10th of October 2010, I think, a friend of mine talked me into joining her for a ghost hunt, or it might have been me who talked her into letting me tag along. For the sake of this story, we will refer to her as E, since I don't think she'd appreciate her name being spread all over the internet. Anyways, she had set up a trip with 2 semi-seasoned ghost hunters, and they were going to visit an abandoned farm located outside a small town called Grastorp. She had visited the place a few years earlier with some other friends. I think they were from her school, and apparently one of her friends had shown some signs of possession briefly, which made me far more interested since possessions are quite intriguing. Anyways, we met up with the ghost hunters in a town close to Grastorp and drove out there at about 2300 hours or something. The farm was not difficult to reach, it was located just off a main road. When we got there it was sometime around midnight, it was pitch black and very cold. I had brought my camera along, a Canon 1000D if you're curious, and took pictures of most everything. The old derelict barn further added to the creepy atmosphere of the place, but we had flashlights, and I was not there alone, so I wasn't afraid. E claimed that there was supposed to be an old house at the farm where the family had lived, but we did not find it. We did, however, find an old small farmhouse that we guessed had been a sty or something similar. We placed a lamp in there to illuminate the darkness. On the floor, various pieces of old junk were placed. Old newspapers, empty bottles, and that sort of thing. The ghost hunters had brought with them EMF meters that they checked, but as far as I recall, they did not seem to give any special readings. They wanted to investigate the sty more, but we also wanted to check the rest of the farm, so we decided to check the rest of the place first and then return there. We wanted to get into the barn. Sadly, the doors appeared locked, as we could not open them, and we weren't quite in the mood to break stuff. One of the ghost hunters managed to get a photo of one of the windows of the barn. There was no smoke or anything visible to the naked eye. I'm still not quite sure what to make of it. Anyways, after making our way around the farm, we got back to the sty, or whatever that building had once been, and decided to do an EVP. We turned off the lights for a minute or so while we recorded. I still have not heard the EVP, and after we turned the lights back on again, they did some tests with their EMF meters. They probably didn't react, and if they did, I don't recall. This is where the story gets interesting. I stood with my back towards the opening where the door had once been when suddenly I heard a sound from behind me, like a small creature moving through the dried leaves. I spun around as quick as I could to catch sight of the creature, but there was nothing there. I asked the others if they had heard anything, and I think they had. E and one of the ghost hunters had been standing right in front of me. The other ghost hunter had been standing in front of me and to the right, and she claimed that she had seen something lifting my coat. She was the one who captured the picture of that vortex. I don't know if there actually was a ghost or something that had lifted the edge of my coat or if she had just seen the tip of my coat rise as I started to spin around. Nevertheless, the sounds I had heard had made me very unsettled. Shortly after, we packed up and left, and I have never gone back there since. Nightmare of the Beast. I was so stupid. I will never doubt magic and monsters after that day. This is my story. Now I live in a small town in northern Indiana. We don't have much to do except for a few small unknown haunted attractions and a bridge people jump off during the summer. I hung out in a group of 3 guys, including me, and 2 girls. We usually just did normal teenage things like being dumb and hanging out near the river. But every now and again we'll all get together at night and be dumb. We were especially dumb that night. To understand this story, you must first know that within my group of friends, I'm known as a warlock for my creepy Wiccan ways. I usually only did small stuff like summoning spirits and placing enchantments on things. To me and my friend, everything I did always worked, and I was so proud of myself for my skills. Until one night the guys in my group and I decide to go to the witch cemetery in our town with their girlfriends. Now my friend Jay, being the cocky one of our group, pulls me aside and asks me, "Hey, bro, do you know any major creepy spells?" I only know a few for the fact that I don't like using them. I replied with a slight yes. He asked quickly after saying this, "Dude, summon the most evil thing you know how to scare the girls, of course." I just nodded and faked a smile as he chuckled. I always carried a small leather bag with candles and other mystic items for times like this. We arrive after about a good 10-minute walk. It was the harvest moon, which is why I was even more worried about what I might summon. We arrive at the entrance of a long path into the woods. The only way in and out of the cemetery is through this path. We walk for another good 5 minutes before we reach an old cemetery covered by the moonlight. I was sure that he warned everyone about what I was going to do until he yelled out, "Ladies and gentlemen, our warlock will now summon a beast to scare and send fear into us." He finished with an over-the-top evil laugh. I looked at him and the girls, and our other friend August was in shock at how scared they were. I asked him, "You didn't tell them?" In a quiet, angry voice, he only replies with a "Dude, even if you do summon something, I can beat it in a fight," as he pulls out a small pocket knife. I just shake my head and go near a grave to set up the candles and charms. Suddenly Jay's girl asks, "W, what are you bringing here?" I only know how to summon a demon and something called a Rugarau, a kind of lycanthropic monster. I didn't know if it would work or not, so I did my best to summon the Rugarau. It gets quiet as I set up my black candles in a star, and I begin to chant. Once I finish, the candles blow out from the wind, and everyone freaks out, but nothing happens, at least not yet. We wait about 8 minutes before Jay doubts me and says, "Let's go, dude, that sucked." I felt kind of good that it didn't work until we left. We only get out and pass the entrance about a minute down the road till my other friend August's girl stops. We see if she's okay, but she just stands there in fear. We didn't know what was going on till Jay's girl screamed and pointed down the road at what the other girl was looking at.
Jay,
and August looked down the road only to see a big dog looking and growling in the dark.
We shrugged it off because we thought it was just a big coyote, which are common where we live. Jay laughs and pulls out his knife. He gets about a foot away from us. We all freeze as the beast stands upon two legs and lets out an unearthly roar at us and Jay. We all scream and pull an all-out sprint to Jay's granny's house about 13 minutes away. I look back behind us to see the most terrifying sight that haunts me to this day. A beast covered in black and matted fur with bright yellow soulless eyes and the gnarliest teeth that I've seen on any creature on this planet. It takes us a while, but we reach his granny's house. We sprint upstairs, and I use every charm I have to try and ward it away. We waited for hours just listening to a raging beast outside somewhere. It takes us hours, but we all eventually fall asleep. We all awaken to dead silence. We all go downstairs, and Jay's granny asks us all how we slept. We couldn't tell her what we saw or what I did. We doubted that she would even believe us. We all replied with a very well, thank you. We drove the girls home shortly after. Afterwards, I, August, and Jay all agreed no more magic or anything while we're together hanging out. To this day we don't speak of the event. And I've stayed away from all black magic and any spells, but to this day I always hear a howl coming from the woods in my backyard on full moon nights, and I always worry at night to this day. Personal experience during paranormal investigation. This happened last night at 8 p.m. I am a former Catholic seminarian. When I was a young lad, I seriously considered becoming a priest, but I later left the seminary and got married. I rarely go to Mass anymore, but I guess I still believe in my religious upbringing. A friend of mine recently invited me to watch a real paranormal investigation conducted by an experienced group in our area. This time, rather than investigating a location, they were investigating a few potentially haunted objects. I am not familiar with all the specific technologies used. In addition to the usual digital voice recorder to capture EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, they were using some kind of night vision video camera that captures figures and shapes that might resemble a human being. It plots the figure on a video screen. They also used EMF-sensitive lights and motion sensor lights, among other devices. Anyway, the first investigation that lasted about an hour was a bust. Nothing at all happened. Not a light flickered, no sounds, no EVPs, no figures, nothing. I was disappointed but not surprised. The second object they investigated during the second hour was this very old, 300-plus-year-old, book that supposedly had a spirit attachment connected to it. It came from a European monastery, and all the previous owners swear it was haunted. The investigators went through the same pattern of questions and answers, and again, nothing happened. I asked if I could try to participate a little, and they graciously said sure. So, I broke out my memory of old Latin prayers and Latin Mass. I said the Hail Mary, Ave Maria, the Our Father, Pater Noster, and some of the canon of the Tridentine, Latin, Mass, Dominus Vobiscum, etc. I also asked it basic questions in Latin. Are you dead? What is your name? Within only a few minutes, nearly every single light was blinking simultaneously. Now, keep in mind, these devices each independently measure environmental variables by different equipment, sensation/touch, EMF, etc. Suddenly, appearing on screen was a human-shaped figure next to the book. It had its appendage, left arm, on the book, and it was floating nearby. When I stepped closer to the book, it retreated. When I backed off, it approached the book again. The lights were all buzzing and going off at the same time. The principal investigator said he heard a disembodied exhalation, which was clearly captured on EVP. As I recited the Latin prayers more loudly and more forcefully, activity really ramped up. I felt a wave of nausea and dizziness overcome me, and I nearly fainted. Suddenly, the electrical activity ceased, all the lights stopped blinking, and the figure on the screen vanished. I honestly have no rational explanation for what I witnessed or may have provoked, but I swear it was real and is now documented on video and audio with 4 eyewitnesses. There were no environmental cues happening at the time of this activity, other than the Latin prayers. The investigators weren't manipulating the equipment, and the devices were not remotely controlled. Now, I didn't physically see anything manifest in my own vision, but the other evidence is indisputable. My first paranormal investigation. Last night, I had my first proper paranormal investigation, and I wanted to share it on here since I have nobody else to tell about it. My buddy and I, both 17, have zero experience, and we're both skeptics. He is less convinced that the unseen world exists and surrounds us than I am. No. I didn't drag him with me. Ever since an odd encounter we had in an abandoned small-town house where a murder supposedly happened, we have been much more intrigued by the paranormal and if there is more to it. We've been to quite a few abandoned places, but never any haunted ones. Finding a haunted location was particularly tedious, as we live in a random shitstain in the countryside of Denmark. After some research, I came across a mansion with some lore behind it, and soon after, I found even more information, and bingo, it included a ghost story. The landowner had a bad reputation as a peasant tormentor. Rumors spread around the village that his spirit wandered around the farm after his death in 1749. This was perfect for us, I thought. So, I printed out the papers at my local library and made them look old and antique with coffee and candles. Fast forward to yesterday. At this point, we've known about the place for about 1.5 months. On the chilly day of the 9th of November, we decided to head out to search the mansion. The drive wasn't as short as we had wished, it was about 44 miles in the direction of Nowhereville. Our first stop was the church where the landowner was supposedly buried. My friend and I wanted to test my brand new K2 EMF meter at the graveyard. The moment we stepped out of the car, we met two fellas with headlamps and metal detectors. Kinda odd, but we said hello and continued on foot to the church. Just before we reached the church, we decided that we should unpack the other piece of equipment that I had brought with us. The Ouija board. Yes. I know some folks, particularly in this community, have strong opinions about it, but my friend and I are skeptics, remember that. We awkwardly unboxed it at a dimly lit bus stop with my buddy's car key coming in clutch, decided to skip the church for now, and carried the octagonal-shaped board and planchette with us to the mansion, which was about half a mile up the road. Our hearts first sank when we came across a monitored area sign near the barn at the mansion. We couldn't back out, not now. My friend was pretty freaked out, he kept pointing out the weird wind noise, which was really just a plane. So we continued along the road, and after a short while, we stood awestruck, gazing at the humongous mansion towering above us. Before we continued, I tapped my buddy on the shoulder because I noticed light emitting from a garage inside the barn next to the mansion. We inspected it a bit closer, and there was indeed light inside. We forgot about it and moved on. I'm pretty convinced that it was just automatic 24/7 light. The tall front door of the mansion was locked, but I had read online from an anonymous commenter that there was an easy entry point in the yard through a broken window. Someone had placed a bar stool below the window for even easier access. Entering was a bit awkward, as I was carrying a backpack with tools, and my friend was carrying a large Ouija board. We made it inside, brushed the dust from the windowsill off our leather jackets, and looked around in the first room. To our surprise, it was very empty. Most abandoned places, in our experience, are very messy. We wanted to search some of the rooms before attempting to contact any spirits. The search was swift. When we found a somewhat secluded room where our flashlights weren't visible from outside, we sat down. My friend prepared the Ouija board on the musty floor, and I turned on our K2 EMF reader and placed it beside the board. We were respectful in our tone when we asked questions to the spirits we wanted to contact. However, despite the fact we dearly wanted it and tried to believe in it, we had zero contact, and there was no activity at all. The planchette never moved, the meter never blinked, and we heard no odd sounds except for creaking floors, a bird having a stroke outside that sounded like a skinwalker, and maybe a little nervous fart. After about an hour inside the mansion, my friend insisted he saw some moving lights outside, and then I went to check as well. In disbelief, I peeked through the broken glass in one of the windows, and to my surprise, there was indeed a light moving towards us. Immediately, we kindly bid the spirits farewell as you're supposed to with a Ouija board, packed up the board, and bolted out to the yard through the window we entered from. We hadn't even made it to the entrance of the mansion when suddenly, an incredibly bright light, probably the same one we saw in the window, shone in our direction through the forest thicket to our side. At first it looked like a very powerful flashlight moving around quickly. We were extra nervous, as it came from the area with camera surveillance. My friend panicked, and we ran as if our lives depended on it. He jumped headfirst into the bushes, and I stood like an idiot in the muddy grass and was almost exposed by the beams of light that filled the air. Turned out to be car headlights. The car passed us rather quickly. Did we overreact? Maybe, but we didn't want to risk it all. And we have prior experience with these types of run-ins with folks you don't want to meet at abandoned places. As soon as the car passed, we made our way to the road and headed back to the car. When we were about to reach the church, we saw another car approach us, and we were completely and utterly exposed in our current position. Two teens in the middle of a dark road, one with a yellow backpack and the other with a cyan glow-in-the-dark octagonal-shaped demon summoning board. Safe to say we would have been cooked if it was a public authority approaching us. Not ideal. When we saw the car, we ran like crazy, took a right at the church, and then I quickly dashed to the bus stop and put down my backpack to seem less suspicious. We played it super cool once it passed us. Phew. Just as we thought we were in the clear, my friend noticed the car had a phone number on the back, and he immediately tied that to a surveillance/security vehicle monitoring the area. "Do we make a run for it?" he asked, and I absolutely loved the sound of that. Never in my life have I been so close to what felt like a heart attack-inducing sprint. At last, we had made it to the warm and safe car. Of course, that wasn't the end of it. I forgot that I had put my backpack at the bus stop. My bright yellow backpack with a half-filled bottle of holy water, my credit card, phone, and papers. I quickly ran over and picked it up, and then we drove home. Despite our unsuccessful investigation, we don't believe less in the unseen world than we did a week ago. He and I are pretty sure that a major reason our devices didn't work is because the ghost stories were just rumors and that the mansion isn't actually haunted, not because we didn't have enough faith or didn't believe in it. Both of us want to believe, and we are committed to scouring every place we find for viable proof. And also, the dad lore will be absolutely diabolical in a short 20 years. If any of you have some advice for us rookies, feel free to share your experiences. Thank you. So this creepy thing just happened to me 2 mornings ago. Now I'm not one to get creeped out or uneasy, you see. I'm a 28-year-old paranormal investigator. I haven't gone out looking for any spirits in a few years because I have a son now with autism and ADHD, so he comes first. But I think they are still trying to come after me? I got out of bed at 4:25 a.m. to take my morning medication so I don't forget it when I wake up again. And I live on a highly busy street, but it's dead quiet. No cars or birds, just silence. That I thought was weird on its own. I look at the clock and put a cigarette in my mouth and see it's now 4:30 a.m., and just as I go to light it outside my apartment balcony bay doors, this extremely loud Hindu/Bollywood soundbite comes on. 3 words. A woman's voice with music. Echoing all around me. And as fast as it started, it stopped. Then back to complete silence. No sound of a car driving away. I looked out of the window and saw no sign of anyone messing around on the street or sidewalk surrounding my apartment. And for a solid 15 minutes after, no traffic or birds were heard. I have no idea what was said because I don't understand the Indian language, and sadly I wasn't expecting it, so I didn't have time to record it. It's 4:07 a.m. now. Thinking about waiting up to see if it happens again. If it does, I will have my camera ready and try to catch it and share it. But if not, what is it that could have happened then? And has anyone else had this happen with that kind of music or another kind? 1. The zone. So, I work for the Forest Service, and my first posting had me in the Pacific Northwest. This was almost a decade ago and well before my job description was changed to include duties that have me investigate things that go bump in the woods, like I do now. To provide context, the first forest I worked in has an area affectionately known as the Zone. This area is commonly referred to as the Zone, serving as a hub for all things unusual in the area. Sasquatch sightings, ghost trains haunting old rail lines, Tommy knockers warning folks off of trails, Batsquatch, missing 411 cases, and even occasional rounds of the most dangerous game have reportedly occurred there. At the time, I was a Cherry FS seasonal, and I approached the warnings and legends shared by my elders with skepticism. One day, while I was out seeking livestock and spring improvements, I found myself right at the edge of the zone. The target area was the bottom of a glacially carved canyon, which, as the crow flies from the office, is only 30 miles. As the seasonal drives are a 3-hour trip, one way. In order to get there, you needed to travel 60 miles by highway to a mountain pass, then 30 miles by forest road, first through one steep-sided canyon, then over another pass and down into the actual target area. So there I was, I had finally reached the valley floor I was looking for. Let me paint you a picture. The road traveled along the edge of a large wet riparian meadow that was bordered by ponderosa pine stands, and the road occasionally would pass through thick stands of lodgepole pines. For those that don't know the difference, ponderosa pines have an orange and black bark and spread out limbs, and you can, on a natural stand or properly maintained stand, see through a couple hundred yards. Contrast that with lodgepole pines, which are grayish, dur-looking trees with scraggly limbs and a tendency to grow so thick, you can maybe see 10 yards into the stand, in a sparse stand. Well, eventually the road was too overgrown with grass for me to safely continue along it with the truck without risking lighting it on fire, so I had to find a clear spot to park and continue on foot. Based on my experiences, the next stand of lodgepole pines should only have been 50 feet or so thick, as the road would dip into the lodgepole stands that were encroaching on the meadow. And so I walked. And walked. And I walked some more. The road had curved a little, and I had lost sight of the meadow. I should have reached the meadow again pretty damn fast. I rounded a bend in the road and thought, finally, as I noticed a break in the trees. Well, it was a clearing. A perfect circle had been cleared in the trees where the road passed through the edge. Not a single stump or stub was in it, no litter or grass, just bare-packed earth. In the clearing center stood a single lodgepole pine, stripped of its branches, and held aloft some 6 feet up its trunk. Wrapped around it as though the tree had grown up through it, was a rib cage that looked to be a deer's, and nestled atop it like some sort of grotesque mask was the pelvic bone of a cow. I stood there, a chill ran down my spine, and I heard no sound from the breeze or birds that had, until I stepped into the clearing, been present as background noise. All the stories I'd heard, both in passing at the office and among the locals in town, filled my head at that time, and rather than continue on, I warily backed my way out of the clearing and headed back to the truck. The way back seemed to be an even longer hike with only my footsteps, breathing, and the beat of my heart to accompany me until I broke back out into the main meadow. The return of the breeze, birds, and even the startled yipping of a coyote that was taking a leak on my truck tire was like a thunderclap to my ears and a relief to my mind as I bolted to the truck and got the hell out. A couple of days later, I returned to the same area with another employee, and we hiked along the road, which, as I had originally suspected, curved through the lodgepole stand and opened back up into the main meadow less than 50 feet later. Additionally, my boot prints from the previous trip suddenly stopped just around the bend, out of sight from the meadow. 2. Wild dogs. So that one's pretty straightforward. At the same time as working on the forest where the zone is, I was also traveling to my parents on a semi-regular basis. Basically the Pacific Northwest to Central California and vice versa by way of Nevada. A lot of open desert. During one of those trips it was near dark, and I was trying to make it to the Idaho border to rack out at a gas station parking lot. Up ahead in the distance in my headlights, I could see a couple of dogs on the side of the road. I slowed a little, they were mutts, but one looked like it had been hit, and the other was worrying over its buddy. Having grown up around dogs, I harbor a deep affection for them. At the very least, if I couldn't do anything for the wounded one, I could at least put it out of its misery. I was moving too fast to safely stop there, but I got turned around and drove back to where I'd seen them near a turnaround off the side of the highway. They'd vanished, not unsurprisingly, since if one of them had been wounded, the sight of a truck rolling past and then creeping back towards them might have scared them off into the brush. So I crept into the turnaround and looked around. There at the edge near a barbed wire fence, I could see them. I popped my door open but stopped. In the glow of my headlights, a load of eyes had started coming out of the brush. All small dogs. Chihuahuas, Yorkies, mutts, etc., and what seemed to be the pack leader was a googly-eyed pug. I was weirded out. I closed the door, and the pug started howling, and the whole pack rushed my truck. I threw my vehicle into reverse and floored it out of the turnaround, spitting gravel at the doors as I GTFO, and I nearly spun out onto the highway, and I made tracks back to Winnemucca. Long story short, a pack of feral toy breed dogs led by a ducking pug apparently set a trap for a full-size vehicle, preying on people who actually have a heart for dogs and had no ducks to give. 3. That time I got to do S&R stuff, and weird shit happened. Different forest. By that point I was more versed with spooky shit in the woods. At this time I was working rec and was in charge of maintaining and collecting fees at an improved campground site. One morning I got a call from my boss. Hey, someone's spot device went off not far from the camp you're in charge of maintaining. Here are the coordinates. S&R can't get out there for a couple days because they're looking for some kid on the coast. So I roll on up to the campground, grab a Pulaski and handheld radio from my truck, and go hiking along the trail near where the dude was and eventually start finding signs of the dude. A day pack right off the trail. I also find some other gear, including a tent, a rope caught in the brush, a tarp, and more. I'm following a set of GPS coordinates, but just as a precaution I start flagging along the route in. Eventually I break out of the brush and find the missing hiker. A small clearing, and he's treed himself up in a snag of a pine tree. I talk at him, and he tells me to duck off. I radio back to the office to let them know that I've found the missing hiker and then attempt to talk him down. The dude seems hysterical, and I eventually get frustrated. I am not paid for this shit, so I thump the bottom of the snag and threaten him that I will cut down the snag whether or not he's in it. This snaps him out of his panic, and he realizes I'm not whatever he thinks I am. I coax him out of the tree and talk with him as we collect his shit. Got caught in a cloudburst after dark, his tent collapsed, so he started hiking down to the campground. And something started chasing him down and off the trail. It sounded like it was mimicking his voice. I shrugged it off and got him down to the camp, where the fire crew took over, took his vitals, etc. Eventually he asked us how we found him. Told him it was his spot device. He said the spot was in his day pack, and we found it at the trail. I shrugged it off. The next day I'm doing my usual thing, maintaining the campground, etc. I see a big dog, a mixed breed of some kind, out of the corner of my eye. It's staring at me from the trailhead that leads off towards where I'd found the lost guy. I'm about to prep to lecture a forest user about having a dog off leash, and it gives me a shit-eating grin before ducking off into the brush and disappearing. I shrug, turn back to my work, and notice all the flagging I'd left out in the woods the day before sitting on the hood of my truck. The rest of that season, there were a few times I felt like I was being watched over when no one else was at the campgrounds. Not a chill down the spine watch, though, if that makes any sense. Also got 2 reports by 2 different campers a week later about Sasquatch, since something threw a tree at someone while they were hiking the lake trail, and something was making whooping noises. I think the second report was the fire crew being stupid, though. I'm part of a ghost hunting team. Here are my experiences. I'll start with a little background on myself. I've been interested in the paranormal since early childhood. It has never scared me, it simply intrigues me. I have wanted to participate in ghost hunting since I was very young. I wanted proof that these things were real. After being on the trips, I have encountered many different and chilling things, but I remain on my middle ground. I believe there is definitely something after we die, but I cannot even fathom the reasons for it. It's enthralling and scary, it makes my adrenaline pump, and I love it. I had a hard time finding a group until one day I did, and I told my boyfriend to email them and ask if they would accept new members or tag along. To our surprise, he did. We maintained email and Facebook communication until his next trip, and we were invited. We live in Puerto Rico, and this first trip was to a local indigenous ceremonial park. It dates back to around 500 AC, if I remember correctly from the information. It's basically a clearing marked with stones that form ballparks where these pre-Taino Indians played. It's a very beautiful place, but even during daylight hours, you can feel there's something all around you. It plays tricks on you, it jumps from tree to tree, hiding. On this day, we set up 4 cameras on certain spots, and for the rest of the night, we used 2 handheld cameras, and our only lights were 3 flashlights. Now, as I said, this place is eerie during the day, but it's spacious and beautiful. At night? It becomes suffocatingly dark and creepy, it feels much, much smaller. During the day, there's always something just outside your field of vision, jumping and dancing through the tree trunks. The more you try to directly look at it, the faster it moves. We all see it as a white shadow that blurs by us. Sometimes the shadows would come very uncomfortably close to us. I was touched and attacked on one of our outings, but more on that later, and even touch us. As the night wore on, we would stand in the middle of each circle and ask questions out loud. We also wrote down indigenous words and would call them out from time to time. We could all hear rhythmic drumming farther off into the distance and also Indian battle cries. Yes, the typical hand tapping over mouth while screaming type of battle cry. The thing that gets to me is that, within a group of 9 people, all of us heard every sound and all described it the same way. At one point during the night, we split into 2 teams. One team was left at base camp, an area outside of the park, and the rest of us went back to keep exploring. During the first 15 minutes, we began to hear music and battle cries. It would first appear to come from one direction, but when we'd move to that spot, it would suddenly be behind us. It had us going in circles. We had walkie-talkies, and we radioed base camp. "Are you guys screaming, talking, or making any noise?" "No, we aren't." "We heard some screaming, we thought it was you guys." At that point, everyone was very excited. Scared but excited. We decided to go and stand, again, in the middle of a park. There are about 6 or 7 rock outlined areas, and turn off everything. As we stood there, most of us could feel a static type energy touching our hands and arms. It literally felt like soft static bolts, the kind you get after dragging your socked feet on the carpet and touching metal. We sat down on the large rocks and remained silent. Soon after, we began to feel tugs and caresses on our bodies and clothing. My boyfriend was sitting next to very rattled, me, and he suddenly got up and paced around slowly. He didn't say a word, but I knew something was wrong. When I asked him later that night, he told me that while we were sitting there, he felt a hand caress the back of his neck and up to his hair. I could understand why he felt unnerved. While sitting in this spot, we looked off into the other parks and clearings adjacent to where we were. At the same time, we all saw a large, white, misty shadow zooming between the trees that were no more than 20 feet away. What makes it interesting is that it wasn't a constant. Every few minutes we'd see a new one in a new spot, and all of us, as if on cue, would point it out. At this point, We were very rattled and got our shit and walked the 10 minutes back to the base camp to pack and go home. It seemed the longer we were there, the more brazen it got, and we just didn't want to duck around with whatever it was. It was obviously capable of touch, and that was very unsettling. On our way home, my boyfriend and I felt very bothered and uncomfortable. We hardly slept that night. Thankfully nothing followed us home, but now we take some holy oil with us and mark ourselves with it. We aren't Christians, but it seems to work for us. Whether it's a placebo effect, it works because we believe it does, or a real thing, we don't know or care. As long as we feel safe from carrying back some of this energy, or whatever you'd like to call it, we're happy. My 2003 encounter with a white witch in Potomac Overlook, Virginia. It was well past midnight, a cold night in late October or early November 2003, deep in Potomac Overlook Regional Park in Arlington, Virginia, our home since we were born. The four of us, me, my brother, 2.5 years older, always dragging us into adventures, and our two closest friends, guys we'd grown up with like family, were out in the woods, up to a bit of trouble. One friend was born a day younger than me, always by my side, the other was about my brother's age, part of every scheme since we were kids running around Arlington. A full moon hung high, so bright it lit the forest like daylight, its silver glow filtering through drifting clouds, casting shadows across the oaks, beeches, and tulip poplars, their leaves red and gold in the autumn chill. We had no flashlights or cell phones, those weren't common for us back then, but the moonlight was enough, showing every branch and leaf. That night, it showed us something we'd never forget. We'd wandered about a quarter mile past the park's nature center, near a fork in the trail, probably where the Red Maple Trail meets White Oak Way, then veered off trail into the deep canopy of the woods. These woods were our backyard, Arlington through and through, but I learned later that spots close to where the Donaldson family's old cemetery once stood, its graves moved long ago. We didn't know that then, we were just kids messing around. In a small clearing, we were building a structure out of sticks and branches, big enough for 2 people, maybe a makeshift log cabin, though I'm not sure exactly what we had in mind. It was our secret spot, something we planned to keep working on over the next few nights. We were joking, tossing sticks, our voices carrying through the dense trees, the moonlight bright enough to see every detail, the rough bark, the scattered leaves, the faint babbling sound of the creek, about 100 yards below, running toward the Potomac. But the woods felt strange, like they were holding their breath, watching us. The air turned colder, not just the late fall chill, but a heavy, unsettling feeling that sank into us. We started hearing things, leaves rustling, soft whispers, maybe footsteps moving through the trees down the hill, toward where the creek babbled, 100 yards below. It wasn't cicadas, they were gone for the season. The sounds were wrong and eerie, circling us in a way that made our skin crawl. We didn't know about Arlington's ghost stories back then, but I'd later hear about spirits tied to the Potomac, right across from our hometown. We stopped joking, our voices fading. My brother looked at me, his usual confidence gone, his eyes searching the darkness. My friend, the one my age, stepped closer, his hands fidgeting with a stick, his face uneasy. The other friend, my brother's age, stood still, staring down the slope, his shoulders tense. We didn't say much, but we all felt it, something was out there. The moonlight lit everything, but it made the shadows down the hill deeper and sharper, like they were hiding something. We stood there, frozen, listening to the rustling, trying to figure out if it was just the wind or something else. My brother whispered, "Do you hear that?" And we nodded, too spooked to talk loud. The whispers came from all around, circling us, strongest from down the hill where the creek babbled. I scanned the clearing, the moonlight showing every branch, every leaf, but nothing else. My friend, the one my age, gripped my sleeve, his breathing quick, his eyes darting toward the slope. The other friend stood rigid, his fists clenched, muttering something under his breath. We were all thinking it, these woods, our woods, didn't feel like ours anymore. The sounds grew louder and more insistent, each rustle making us jump, our nerves stretched tight. We started looking down the hill, expecting something in the trees toward the creek, the moonlight casting long shadows that seemed to shift on their own. Minutes passed, maybe longer, the whispers and footsteps circling, closing in, making us feel trapped in our own clearing. Then, all at once, without a word, we turned toward a spot about 30 yards away, down the hill toward the creek's direction, drawn by some instinct we couldn't explain. There she was, a woman, coming up the hill from where the creek babbled, 100 yards below, her white robes glowing under the moonlight. Her clothes looked old, like something from colonial times, flowing and pale, catching the moon's silver light. We called her the White Witch later, before we heard any stories, because those glowing robes and her terrifying presence felt otherworldly, like an apparition. Her anger hit us hard, a wave of hatred and animosity so strong it froze us in place, too scared to even touch the stick structure we'd been building. I'd learned later about ghostly figures tied to the Potomac, just across from Arlington, but we didn't know that then, just that she was terrifying, climbing the hill toward us. We stood there, hearts pounding, unable to move, trying to make sense of her. I whispered to my brother, "What is that?" My friend, the one my age, said, "Is that even real?" His voice was shaking. His older brother didn't speak, just stared, his jaw tight. We didn't call her a witch out loud, but we all felt it, something supernatural, something ghostly. We kept our voices low, afraid she'd hear us, but we were thinking the same thing: this wasn't a person. Her anger was so intense it felt like she could hurt us. We stayed frozen, staring, the moonlight showing every fold of her robes, but her face stayed shadowy, unclear, framed by the dark trees down the hill. My brother's face was pale, his eyes wide, like he was seeing something impossible. My friend, the one my age, was breathing fast, his hands clenched, stepping back slowly. The other friend stood rigid, his fists still tight, like he was fighting the urge to run. The hatred pouring off her kept us from even glancing at our structure. We were too scared, too anxious to get out of there. We didn't know what to do, but we couldn't stay. We started backing away, slow and careful, from our clearing up toward the dirt trail, keeping our eyes on her coming up from the creek's direction. She didn't stop, her robes glowing in the moonlight, like the spirits I'd later hear about across the river in Georgetown, tied to Arlington's own backyard. The dirt trail was clear, no branches, no thorns, just dirt and scattered leaves, lit bright by the moon. Every few steps, we looked back, and she was closer, 25 yards, then 20, moving up the hill behind us. Her shape grew clearer, but her face stayed hidden, her anger heavier, pressing on our chests. The whispers and rustling followed us, maybe just the woods, maybe her, with the faint babbling of the creek still audible below. We moved faster, our footsteps louder, our breaths coming quickly. My brother kept glancing at me, making sure I was close. My friend, the one my age, stumbled once, catching himself on a tree, his eyes darting back to her. The other friend stayed near, his head turning with every step. Then my friend's older brother, the one my brother's age, let out a sharp cry of pain. He grabbed his arm, and we saw it, a fresh scratch, red and bleeding, right there on his skin. There was nothing on the trail to cause it, no bushes, no sticks, just open dirt. "What was that?" he said, his voice shaking, eyes wide. I'd learned later about Potomac stories where spirits leave marks on those who don't belong, but in that moment, we just knew it was wrong. Panic took over, and we started hurrying, still on the dirt trail, our feet pounding the ground, the moonlight showing every step. We reached the end of the dirt trail, where it turned to gravel or mulch, then hit the paved road past the nature center. The road curved and went uphill, and we turned around, thinking we might have lost her, but there she was, still in the woods behind us, her robes glowing, moving closer. We kept going along the pavement, around a bend, hoping we'd shaken her. But when we looked back, she was rounding the bend behind us, coming up the hill toward the parking lot where the covered picnic area and bathrooms were. She stayed behind us, her robes glowing against the clouds, her anger relentless, following us up the hill. We ran faster, scrambling up the paved road to the parking lot at the top, anxious to reach the car, our hearts racing as we felt her closing in. We reached the car, her presence still heavy, her glowing robes trailing us. We threw ourselves into the car, hands shaking, fumbling with the keys. The engine roared, and we sped off, racing down the hill from the parking lot, the road curving past the tennis court at the bottom. We looked in the rearview mirror after passing the tennis court, and there she was, still on the road, her white robes glowing, trailing us at some indeterminable speed. What speed can an apparition move to just be there? That's when we said, "Let's get out of here." We floored it, continuing along the road surrounded by houses, up another hill with a slight curve, silent, our hearts pounding. As we hit the lights of Military Road and turned left toward our homes, we all let out a breath, maybe a sigh of relief, but her image stayed with us, burned into our minds. The next day, we gathered at my friend's house in Arlington, exhausted, unable to sleep. We didn't argue, we all agreed on what we saw, still shaken by her glowing robes and that wave of hatred. My friend's mother overheard us, her face turning pale. She pulled an old book from a shelf, some kind of local history or folklore collection, maybe privately printed, its details are fuzzy in my memory. She read us a passage about two witch sisters tied to Potomac Overlook, near our trails, maybe near that Donaldson cemetery where something tragic happened long ago. The story described ghostly figures haunting the land, and it matched our White Witch, one sister, her robes glowing with rage. We'd already called her the White Witch, a name we came up with before hearing this, just from what we saw coming up from the creek's direction. We read the book ourselves, saw the words, and felt it sink in. I've searched for that book since, libraries, bookstores, online, but it's nowhere, like it existed just for us that day. Looking back, this place, our Arlington home, has a history that makes you believe it could happen. That Donaldson Cemetery, right in our town, carries stories from colonial days, feuds, losses, maybe betrayals. The Potomac River, flowing past our woods, has its ghosts, like spirits across in Georgetown, tied to the land we grew up on. We didn't know any of that as kids, we were just scared, shaken by what we saw. Our White Witch, the name we gave her, fits those stories. Maybe she was one of those sisters, stirred up by us messing around in the deep canopy near the creek in late fall, when old tales say spirits are closer. That scratch on my friend's brother's arm, on a clear dirt trail? It might have been a fluke, but it felt like her warning. A month or two after I started dating my wife, around 2013, I told her this story, and we've talked about it many times, coming to different conclusions. We've hiked Potomac Overlook during the day, but she's said again and again that she'll never stay there past nightfall. Me, I don't avoid it, I'd go back to experience it again, to understand what it was now that I'm older, but as a parent now, living down south, I can't just wander Potomac Overlook at a whim anymore. No book I've found names the White Witch or her sister at Potomac Overlook, but some stories stay in Arlington families, in old books, or in the land we call home. If you wander off trail after midnight in late October or early November, about a quarter mile past the nature center into the deep canopy, under a full moon, keep your eyes open. You might see her white robes coming up from the creek's direction, hear the creek babbling below, feel her anger, and know she's still there. Haunted college campus, from the custodian. I am a custodian at a university. I started working at this university in July of this year. I had heard other custodians talk about haunted buildings, and even some of them had pretty strange pictures to back up their claims. A few months ago 3 of us got moved into the physics building because the custodians there had let it get kind of bad. We were very disheartened, but in 2 weeks we had the place looking pretty decent again. I work on the 2nd floor by myself. During the first week I started to notice strange things. Creepy feelings, weird noises, and such. I was able to tell myself it was just my imagination or it's just an old building. One morning I was dust mopping, and I heard what sounded like someone throwing a trash can down the stairs. I thought the 2 guys on the 1st floor were being too lazy to carry it down to the basement, the elevator being out of order, so I yelled down, "Hey! Y'all quit ducking around down there," and went to see what on earth they were doing. I went downstairs, but neither of them was there, so I went back to their floor to find both of them were busy, one cleaning the bathrooms and one sweeping out the auditorium. I asked, "Which one of you guys threw a trash can down the stairs?" Both of them said they hadn't gone downstairs or been working near them, so I asked if they had heard that loud noise. They gave me a weird look, neither of them knew what I was talking about. So I returned to my duties a bit shaken and curious as to what had caused that noise. A little after that I was singing while I worked. It was one of my sad Irish tunes I like. When I finished my song, I was standing by my janitor's closet when I heard a woman's voice singing down the hall. So I started down the hall to see who was singing. About halfway down the hall, the singing stopped. I continued to the end of the hall to find myself standing alone. No one had been there. I started telling the other 2 custodians about the weird things, and they both laughed and said I had been mixing chemicals in my mop bucket and it was all in my head. The noises and singing continued off and on. One morning all 3 of us were on my floor for our break, and we heard the singing. One of the guys asked if I had a radio up there, and I said no, that's what I've been talking about. He said it has to be someone's radio somewhere and dismissed it. Recently on the morning of Halloween, I was on the 1st floor talking to our boss, who had come to check on us. The guy who dismissed the singing had gone to the 2nd floor to get the trash from the room since I was distracted by the boss. All of a sudden the guy from the 2nd floor came running down the stairs and said, "Who is ducking around on the 2nd floor?" We told him we had all been on the 1st floor the whole time. He told us that he was collecting trash at the end of the hall, where I had heard the singing, and loud banging noises started coming from one of the labs. He thought someone was breaking in until he realized he was on the 2nd floor. So I decided to go up to investigate with him. We went into the lab to find no one there. I told him I was going to try the ghost hunter thing and try to get a recording of it, and maybe it would talk. He said he wasn't staying in the room and went to finish the trash. I stayed and pulled out my voice recorder on my phone and started asking questions. When behind me, I heard a couple loud bangs. I turned around to find an empty part of the room. I immediately ran and showed the other guy the recording. We didn't go back up on the second floor that day. A few days later the boss was visiting again, and we told him the story and showed him the recording. He got excited and wanted to make it happen again. So we went back to that lab, opened the door, and stood out in the hall. I told him that it seems to react to music, so the boss started singing some song from the 70s, and no sooner had he started than the banging started from inside the room. He smiled, and we went inside to find no one in there. So we closed up the lab and returned to the guys on the second floor and told them what happened. We have all continued to hear voices singing and loud bangs coming from different parts of the building. One guy worked by himself one morning and is so shaken by whatever happened to him he won't talk about it. So far that's all I have. Sometimes if a custodian says there is something weird in their building, the boss will send me over there for a morning to try to find something. Like the old building that just had renovations done, the girl there was afraid to work by herself, so the boss sent me for the morning. I didn't find anything there, though. My brother, sister, and I decided to go ghost hunting. We searched online for where to find the supernatural. We landed at Saguaro Ranch Park in Glendale, Arizona. It's about a 40-minute drive from us. We hit a few smaller places in between. No occurrences. We eventually get to the park. None of us have ever been to this park, which is a historical treasure for Phoenix, as it still contains historical houses. It's not a park with slides and sandboxes as much as it's a big lot with old houses and pretty flowers. The park is also encased in wrought iron fences. I suppose to keep vagrants and the like out. So, after hours, no one should be able to get in. We park north of the park and pier, we see nothing. We decide to get closer, the three of us. I am the oldest of the three, 26, 24, and my baby brother is 22. We park at the intersection of Brown Street and 60th Doctor. We then walk into the parking lot of the neighboring library. We creep and creep, trying to get closer to the center of the park, until we hear the scariest screeches we've ever heard. Not like a woman crying for help or anything, but it did scare the shit out of us and was scary nonetheless. We bolt. It's 80 more yards back to the car, we get there and recoup. We get back to Brown and 60th, and we look south into the park, and almost dead center of the park is a street light, and from 120 yards out we see the silhouette of a person walk under the light, from one side of the light to the other, almost as if they're keeping patrol. I'm thinking it's a night guard, because after all it's city treasure. Either way, it's all a little weird. We're thoroughly freaked out by what we see. Naturally we drive to the south side, North Glendale CC, and debate storming the gates. A lot closer to the creepiness we've seen. But we all decline and leave. The next day we return. The park is open, it's daylight, and we see everything. There is no housing for a security officer, and the loud screeching we hear turns out to be peacocks, which are housed in the park. The silhouette could have been a vagrant, but I'm content it was something creepy. Saguaro Ranch Park. I once asked a famous ghost hunter what his scariest moment was. This is his story. Back when I was in college, the Student Campus Activity Council hired a famous ghost hunter to come speak at our school. I've always loved the paranormal, so I left my skeptical boyfriend behind in his dorm and hightailed it over to the auditorium. The ghost hunter was someone I'd never heard of, but he had an impressive background and seemed to have several things in the works at the time. This was in 2005, I think he actually might have a TV show now. He was a man of small stature with a little white professor's beard and a receding hairline, but the way he spoke about the afterlife was fascinating. You could tell he truly believed what he claimed to see, either that, or he was a hell of a salesman. He had us hanging on every word. We watched some interesting video clips of his investigations. He had a nice collection of photos and scary stories to go with them. I remember one about a haunted doll that he said moved freely around the room of the person who had picked it up at a flea market, just not when anyone was around to witness it. Towards the end he opened up the floor for questions. There were your typical dumb college kid questions, have you ever seen someone's head spin around like in The Exorcist? And stuff like that, and a few that were actually pretty interesting. I decided I wasn't going to let this opportunity to speak to someone so apparently revered in the field of the supernatural slip away, so I raised my hand. The ghost hunter spotted me, pointed, and smiled. Yes, you, the girl in the white shirt? Yeah, hi, I said, and I know I sounded nervous, because I felt so dumb for sounding so nervous. I was just wondering, what's the scariest thing you can remember from your career as a ghost hunter? I was halfway back in the auditorium, quite a distance from the stage, but I saw his face fall. I know I did. Well, he said, forcing a tight little laugh, it was forced, I know it was. There are so many scary moments to recall. They tend to pop up quite often when you're in my line of work. This got a little chuckle from the audience. I suddenly felt pretty stupid for asking the question at all. He proceeded to tell some story about tracking a poltergeist in an abandoned elementary school and his flashlight failing. I remember because it really wasn't very scary. At least, it didn't seem that way for someone who hunts ghosts for a living. He moved on from the story and answered a few more questions. He didn't look my way again. When it was over and everyone started to leave, I decided not to get stuck in the crush of students leaving through the front door. Feeling somewhat dejected, like I had done something wrong, I slipped quietly out the theater exit and headed for my dorm. The ghost hunter was sitting outside on a bench near the bike racks, smoking a cigarette. I ducked my head and tried to get by without him noticing. "Hey, kid." He took another drag and crushed the cigarette out on the cement bench beside him. "Listen, I'm sorry." I remember blurting, feeling like such a stupid little girl. "I know my question was dumb. I wasn't trying to make fun of you or anything." He shook his head. He brushed the ashes off the bench. He patted the space beside him, inviting me to sit. I hesitated. This could definitely be a case of stranger danger, just like they taught in the intro to university classes, then sat down, keeping a healthy distance between us. He was old, I was young, and I could probably outrun the guy. Or who knows, maybe I was just as stupid as I felt. "I didn't tell the truth," the ghost hunter said. His face looked much older close up, the wrinkles deeper. The confident salesman aura had faded from him, leaving behind a man in his 60s who had clearly seen a lot of things. That story I told, it wasn't the scariest moment of my career. "I know," I remember saying. He nodded, as though he had known I knew. "This is the scariest moment of my career," he said, and this is what he told me. It was the 1970s, I was a much younger man. I hadn't reached success in the paranormal industry quite yet and was left to pick up the scraps that the pros didn't want. Usually they were schizophrenics whose broken minds tricked them into believing there were phantoms after them, or children playing pranks on gullible and concerned members of the neighborhood. If anything, it was a simple cleansing of the home with sage, and off I went. When I first got the call, I was ecstatic. What the client was describing appeared to be a full-blown demonic haunting, complete with physical manifestations, possession, and multiple witnesses. It was the break I was searching for. It was the break I needed. The only detail that truly worried me was that their teenage son, the person they claimed to be suffering from possession, had become violent with members of his family. Up until recently he'd only acted out of character, moody. However, a week prior he had tried to hurt his older female cousin. She was shaken but unharmed. The family sent her to live elsewhere until it could all be figured out. Therefore, when I headed out to their home, I made sure to arrive fully prepared. I brought holy water, crucifixes, sage, and, just for good measure, a small loaded handgun. I knew it wouldn't come to that, but something about the mother's frantic tone over the phone told me it was just a good idea. I wish I could say the visit itself was exciting. Unfortunately, from the moment I pulled into the driveway of the beautiful remodeled Victorian, all activity seemed to stop, that is, if it was ever there to begin with. I spent 2 weeks investigating the home. I used equipment considered very technologically advanced for the era. I studied energy waves. I interviewed the son whose family claimed to be possessed when in fact he just seemed to be depressed, perhaps psychologically unwell. I recommended a therapist, a renowned child psychologist who was famous for his work with violent young men. On my last day in the house, they took him into the city for treatment. His parents returned shortly before midnight, retiring wearily to their bedroom, leaving me alone in the kitchen to go over my findings. There was nothing to be said, and I knew it. Everything they described could be written off to the hysterics of a family who couldn't admit their son was in desperate need of medical attention. Everything, that is, except for the drains in the floor. Upon touring the home, I was impressed with how up-to-date it had been brought. It was clearly from the early 1900s and kept in immaculate condition. The woodwork and character of the house were carefully preserved as it was given necessary updates, like modern plumbing and electricity. The basement was the only area that seemed stuck in time. The walls were a clammy stone that was prone to gathering moisture, leaving it unfit to store anything vulnerable to spiders or mold. The family had left it empty for this reason, and while it certainly felt very spooky to spend any amount of time in the windowless room with a single hanging light and its vast cement floors, I never recorded anything of note in this area. However, there was one thing I couldn't understand. Given the approximate time the home had been built and its presence in a residential neighborhood, there was simply no accounting for the 4 large slotted drains set in the cold concrete floor. As I sat alone in the kitchen, poring over my meager findings, trying to find meaning in all these words, I heard something. It was only a little sound at first, and so I ignored it. But then it came again, louder this time. There was a steep spiral staircase that led to the second floor, winding up from the corner of the small kitchen, and it was where the noise seemed to be coming from. Assuming it was simply one of the homeowners restless after dropping their son off in an institution, I glanced up. It was coming down the stairs. I can't say walking, because that wasn't the case. It was just. Floating isn't even the right word. Just coming. Coming down the stairs, straight at me. It had no eyes. It had no face. And yet somehow I knew it was looking at me, right at me, into the very depths of my soul. Then it spoke. I'm not sure how it spoke. I don't think I actually heard anything, so perhaps it used some sort of telepathy? Either way, I can recall the words to this very day. You know what he did to us? I didn't think. I couldn't. I just ran. I upended my chair when I fled, scattering papers across the kitchen that claimed this house wasn't really haunted, it was all the hallucinations of a very sick boy. I left them there. Do you know how awful that is? I left those people in that house with that thing. I didn't stop driving for 30 miles, for God's sake. When I realized how far I'd gone, I finally pulled over and called the family from a payphone. They were the furthest thing from my mind when I saw it. All I could do was respond to the deep animal instinct to escape, to run out of that supposedly safe house with my tail between my legs. They moved, I think. I was unable to continue my investigation. In writing I cited insufficient evidence, but I knew it was cowardice. I believe the house was leveled a few years later. I ended up doing my own research. Curiosity ate away at me with vicious little rat teeth as time went by, the accusation still ringing fresh in my ears. You know what he did to us? And eventually, yes, I did. Old newspaper clippings didn't tie the stories together, not necessarily, but I was able to piece some meaning out of the yellowed excerpts. At some point around the turn of the century, the house had been the residence of a well-respected mortician. Unable to find a building in town to suit his needs, he said he built his own home/office space. It was a grand feat of architecture and a shining example of a true entrepreneur, a man pursuing the American dream of running his own business. Upstairs, the bedroom. Mid-level, the funeral home. In the basement, a mortuary. I knew what the drains were for. Separately, decades later, another well-respected member of the local community was arrested under the suspicion of abuse of his professional position with moral cause. The newspaper didn't elaborate, probably due to the sensitive nature of the crimes, but his punishment was minor. After a brief stay in the local jail, the perpetrator stripped his home of all its value and left town before trial, never to be seen again. It didn't take much to guess the connection. I suppose I don't know for sure, but the words of that thing still echo through my head to this day. You know what he did to us? There was a reason that mortician felt such a strong desire to build a house that contained his business, to suit his needs. The things that were done in the basement were unspeakable. But yes, I know. And it's because of this, coming face to face with the true nature of man in its darkest places, that the encounter with that faceless thing is the scariest moment of my career. Because now I know. I still remember his expression, the way all the color dropped out of him as he went on, the white hair of his beard barely distinguishable from his pale skin. The slump of his shoulders. The way his voice shook. I apologized. He waved me off. He left. I felt terrible. I still feel terrible for making him relive that moment. But, as I grew up, as campus activities were replaced with bills and my own career, the ghost hunter fell from the forefront of my mind little by little.